Wheel of Genre, the show for readers who still haven't figured out how to open their third eye. Each month we spin the wheel and land on a different genre. Right now we are reading books that are Gnostic fiction, including this one, David Lindsay's A Voyage to Arcturus. I'm Zach, and I'm interested in a lot of things in this book, but I'm really interested in just how we are going to talk about this. This is such a monumental task. I'm kind of standing on the precipice and just shivering right now, Bob.
I'm Bob. I'm interested in finally explaining everything about this book, Zach, because we're the best darn bookcast pod book YouTube on the internet. Except for infinite text and literally books Bob. And liminal spaces. Yeah, we got all the answers here.
So before we begin, I feel like the warning I want to throw out is we want to go deep on this book. So we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about the plot of this. I think that really it's best for us just to dive deep. So if you're watching this right now, we are just going to presume that either you've already read it and you're familiar with the plot, or you haven't read it yet and you don't feel like knowing more about a book before you read it harms your active reading experience. AKA, this is a spoiler-full review. Love it or leave it. So A Voyage to Arcturus. A lot of people have been saying that we got to read this book. And it is so hugely influential. Of course, Harold Bloom, C.S. Lewis, Tolkien, they all sing this book's praises. But it actually started out deeply, deeply obscure. It had an initial print run of 1,500 copies, of which less than 600 actually sold. And it actually almost wasn't even published. It was originally titled Nightspore in Torments, and the publisher accepted it only on two conditions. Number one, cut 15,000 words from it. And I would personally like to know which 15,000, where did those words go? What section was it come from? And also they needed to change the title because the publisher wanted something that could capture the public's interest. So it was switched to a much more kind of Wellesian, H.G. Wellesian, A Voyage to Arcturus. So initial critics, they didn't know exactly where to place it. I think maybe today critics don't know either, but what I found was super interesting was that the initial reviews placed it in the lineage of Edgar Allan Poe and Baudelaire, two authors who I personally never would have really placed side by side with David Lindsay.
Zach, I watched this. And Zach and I are going to do a second video for all of our sources because we've used all of our life for the last few days studying this book, and we have so many sources to share. I've watched a musical, I've watched a movie, I've watched maybe 20 videos. Anyway, but I found in one of the videos there was this. I think it's the University of Glasgow, and they did for the centenary of the centenary. God, I can't even say the word. Anyway, the 100-year anniversary of the book coming out in 2020, they did a video with 4 scholars all talking about this book, and they looked at some of the different covers that have gone out. So the initial one that came out in 1920, as you said, was very hard to even get published in the first place. It's just like text. It's just plain old text. And then it came out again, I think like 10 years later, and basically all it talked about was its like tragic publishing history. Still no cover, still no illustration at all. It's just its tragic, publication history. Then it doesn't come out again, at least in the US, until 1968 when Ballantine Books came out with it. And that's that really famous cover of the Shrock, the flying kind of bug dragon-like thing. And so Ballantine, when they came out with it, it just exploded for at least a short period of time. That movie came out like 5 or 6 years later, and it got a really kind of renewal, and then it went downhill again. And then 1982, it came out again, 2002. It has been an interesting challenge for different publishers to get this book going, and it never seems to quite work.
Yeah, and as an author, I couldn't even imagine living through that, because you can tell that so much of himself, so much of his thoughts, so much of his creativity was put into this book. And from violetapple.org, I guess, I can't tell if it's official, if it's a fan site. I'm not sure. What is it?
It's really cool. So this guy, he just came out with a new biography, actually, all about David Lindsay, and he has been working tirelessly on his own, just searching for anything to put together about David Lindsay. And so he's read different articles that were written by Lindsay's friends, and his name is Ewers. Let's see. Violet Apple is his website that he's been putting together by himself, but it's not really official, but it's like the best source for David Lindsay stuff because this guy is so devoted to it. Sorry, Zach, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, no. So I read a really interesting description of the end days of his life. So this is after this book had come out, and then he did a series of 4 or 5 other novels that were equally unsuccessful. And then he tried to return back to this kind of philosophic fiction, and then it kind of sputtered out for him. But I'm just going to read the quote because I think it's really interesting. E.H. Viziak, a close neighbor in Hove, describes Lindsay as both, quote, one of the most equable and placable of men, and, quote, radically unhappy, dissatisfied, hungry for recognition. Lindsay's biographer, Bernard Sellin, says he, quote, achieved a kind of serenity of spirit in his last 6 years, but there were obvious difficulties. Financial worries had put a strain on his marriage. As the Second World War began, a bomb dropped near the Lindsay home, injuring David, who was taking a bath at the time. Increasingly, he withdrew, finally retreating to his room at the top of the house and not emerging for an entire week, even to eat. When he did come out, his wife was horrified at his appearance and insisted he go to the hospital. But it was too late. A dental abscess, left untreated for too long, had turned gangrenous. Blood poisoning set in, and David Lindsay died in hospital on the 16th of July, 1945. Such a like an emotionally sharp ending to his life. And I don't know why, but this note about how he was radically unhappy, dissatisfied, and hungry for recognition really kind of cut me to my core. I felt like, I don't know.
I know. Such a in the Violet Apple is really good. And his name is Murray Ewing. I got his name wrong earlier, but you're right, Zach. The way that Lindsay's life kind of worked out seems really unfair to how much work he was putting into this. And I guess when he was working as like a copywriter or some kind of editor for 15 years, it's called an underwriter. I don't actually know what that is, but he's writing and collecting notes and all sorts of stories that would eventually go into Voyage to Arcturus. So when he just quit, moved to Cornwall, and just settled down, he said, okay, I'm going to write this book. And all of that 15 years of just gathering and thinking, he put all into Voyage to Arcturus. Was a flop, didn't, as far as publishing history. Then he came out with a few different, I think he wrote 6 total novels that eventually got published. 2 are after his death, and then 2 were never published at all. And one of those is The Violet Apple, and that's why The Violet Apple is called that. But J.B. Pick, who I guess knew David Lindsay personally, also wrote an article about him. And he was saying that in reading some of his books, you can kind of see that depression or that kind of loss of faith in himself starts to show up more and more in the book. So even The Devil's Tour, which there seems to be some traction for that book recently on YouTube. People are trying to read it, and it's like this tome. I think it's over 1,000 something pages. But he says that when reading it, he can feel that kind of the energy is, he's losing steam. He's losing passion about his own writing. And it's kind of like, you can see that, at the end of his days, he's just not even paying attention to the pain inside of his mouth from this abscess so far to the point it's gangrenous, and he's still not going to the hospital. He kind of has, he had faith that eventually readers would find him, and it finally has happened. But I think at the end of his life, he was kind of starting to lose that faith, and you can see it in his writing, I guess, his later writing.
So when it comes to Voyage for Arcturus, Bob, what happens in this book?
Oh my God. Okay. So I've noticed if you try to describe this book, it just goes on for hours. So preparing for this, Zach, I completely failed because looking at my notes now here, it says 10,172 words. And then I was writing an article and it ended up being 10,000 Chinese characters. No one's going to read that. So in my preparation, it was... Yes, it's been a challenge. But I think we should talk about some of the scenes that we really like and kind of allow them to expand. But very basically, there is a crazy seance that happens. We are introduced to 3 main characters. One of those characters actually ends up being our main character that we follow. But in the middle of the seance, one of these characters gets these other two to say, hey, let's go on a trip. We're going to go somewhere crazy. So this guy, his name is Crag, and he invites Nightspore and Maskell on this trip. Nightspore seems to already know what's going on, but he seems bored by absolutely everything. Maskell's like, hell yeah, I'll do anything. I'll go to this place. I'll let go of my old life. They go up to a tower. They take a combination of a drug combined with something called a back ray combined with a crazy spaceship that they get into, and they go off to Arcturus. Now, Arcturus is a star system that has two suns. One is blue and one is yellow. And they cause kind of strange colors that we would not be able to see on Earth happen in this planet called Tormance. So they get into the spaceship, they go into Tormance. When Maskell wakes up, the other two guys are totally gone. Then Maskell goes through this crazy series of meeting people in different places, starting to make friends, abandoning, mostly murdering those friends, and then moving on to a new place. And each time, and I think this is one element that seems to really attract people and also really repel people, it seems to be kind of a whole philosophical system every step that he goes. And as he goes through all of these different places, he eventually finds out, I guess we said this is spoiler full, so I'll just go for it right now. All of these cool things that he finds out, eventually we realize, okay, Maskell has been Nightspore all along, and that's why that old title is so interesting, Nightspore in Tormance, because truly, Nightspore has been doing something more real, wherever he and Crag have been this whole time. Maskell is then disposed of, Nightspore emerges again, and it seems like, okay, Nightspore has needed to use Maskell as an instrument to become something new, to overcome something, to finally escape this whole, this is where it gets very Gnostic, to escape this whole planet, this whole system of Tormance. He has somehow left it, and that's where it's so Gnostic.
I really want to talk about that ending more, but I feel like we got to build up to it just a little bit. So I guess the first question I have for you, Bob, is as I was reading it, I noticed that the landscape descriptions were taking up about a third of each chapter. So he's constantly moving to a different area. One thing that I really started thinking about was what do you make of the different, there's a lot to say about the different characters who come in, and I think we will say a lot about the different characters, but do you think that readers should be paying attention to the landscape? Is there any allegorical significance to the landscape in your mind?
Oh my God, I never thought about allegorical significance to the landscape. That's a very good point.
Sorry to ambush you with this.
Whoa. That was, to me, the most... I really enjoy all of the other stuff too, but I really loved the landscape descriptions. That's some of the most fun parts of Dune too, is just describing how Dune works. And so there's crazy animals. There's animals that look like just collections of trees. And they kind of don't have a distinction between animals and plants. So there's these weird combinations of things. And there's this one that's like a kind of a flying carpet that has all of these feet that just circle, it just runs around, but it's a garden. It's just like this running garden. So there's so many different animals. There's the colors. There are strange things with the actual land itself just suddenly lifting up, all of these tectonic plates underneath are crashing together. So at one point, our two characters that we'll come to, Maskell and Oceax, when they're riding that Shrock, this kind of flying weird dragon insect combination, they're flying up, pretty high, and then suddenly the Earth just comes up to meet them, and they have to fly higher and higher and higher, or the Earth is going to, collide with them. There is strange geysers that shoot so high up into the sky that they don't actually come back down. They go so high that they just evaporate. So it's this never-ending shooting water fountain that just turns into a cloud at the top. So there's really interesting things to look at in the landscape here, and I highly recommend, don't get bored by this, but actually try and imagine it. One of the characters in that seance, who I think is kind of a mouthpiece for Lindsay getting started on doing this project, where he says, "I dream with eyes open." And that's the title of that new biography about him, "I Dream with Eyes Open." And so I think he really wants to communicate this very intense dream vision that he has been working so hard on. And the environment is included in that, not necessarily as an allegory, but as the concrete reality of his vision.
it is very dreamlike. And that's, I guess, in more ways than one. I think that saying that works in many different ways, because you could say that something is dreamlike and have that be shorthand for being like it's vague, or even worse, it's it's like a dream, like it's meaningless. You know what I mean? Like you could be talking about the meaninglessness of dream logic, or the flip side of that is the innumerable people who say that dreams are meaningful. So it's like, part of the tension of this is you have to decide for yourself what is less important, what is meant to kind of like alienate you or derealize the text through language, like kind of create a sense of disorientation and flux in it, and what is literal and then what is allegorical. There's so many different registers, and the book, every good book tells you how to read it, and this book does a lot of telling you how to read it. There's at one point where he's talking to Joywind, and he's asking her about the name of something. And she says, well, you might call it that. But the thing about names here is that even though they sound poetic to you, they describe something innate about the nature of the thing that they are. And like, when you look at the names of all of these things, like, I mean, just for example, the planet is called Tormance. So that's like the word torment and romance put together into one word. And like, the more you sit with all of these words, like they all get in some sense down to the essential like meaning of the thing. And yet it never feels like a one-to-one allegory. You're constantly uncovering layers. Like an archaeologist, you're uncovering layers, but you never see the full dinosaur skeleton. Does that make sense? Or you do see it. I don't know, Bob.
Do the dinosaurs have feathers now? Just a side note.
They do. Yeah. Just like a chicken. They're just chickens like a chicken. Now. I think we've gone all in on the dinosaurs, or chickens are just new dinosaurs. I think
big scary chickens.
Where we're at.
I think it's a good place to be, or maybe not. But so a lot of things that you said, I really agree with completely in reading this story. I want to come back to dreams later. You and I both have our theories, which we need to explain. But one note, I think, too, is there really cannot be a definitive theory about how to look at this book. But Zach has a tool that he's going to use to look at this book. I have a tool that I'm going to use to look at this book. And I think that's fair. I mean, we know a good bit about David Lindsay, but for my theory, we don't know if he read the stuff that I'm going to bring in. And for Zach's theory, we don't know that he read the stuff that he's going to bring in. We know that he was really into H. Rider Haggard, Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, Verne, I think. So he's into a lot of different classics, and we have a basic idea, but no one only reads like 4 people. He probably read a lot of other things. But there are really interesting names, and I want to throw some ideas out.
Well, Bob, I think now's a good time for us to share kind of our tool set. And I think at one point I texted you because I was like, my brain got in this space because we started off with the seance, and then Arcturus has a lot of like occult significance, for, I mean, I don't know anything about Arcturus, but I just know that like
Arcturians, a
lot of people have said, it's a thing. It's a UFO thing. It's an occult thing. So as I was reading it, I was like, I'm pretty sure these steps that we're going through really just kind of map out onto the Kabbalah. And I was like, there's a lot going on here. This is just my tool set that I was looking at it, but I was like, what they call like path working, like imagining yourself walking the paths along the, the tree of life in the Kabbalah, and you encounter different personas, different personalities. Each step has its own kind of like outlook, philosophy, different kind of personality trait, and you're supposed to encounter that. Kabbalah is its whole thing. I'm not a Kabbalah expert, but I just from what little I know, I was like, it feels a lot like what this book is to me is a long path working session. It's going from place to place on the tree of life until you ascend up to the highest vision, the full revelation of the true nature of reality. Now, I ultimately abandoned that perspective, but that was what I texted you.
Okay.
Yeah, that was what I texted you earlier.
I'd be really interested in looking at that more closely, because Each relationship that Maskell finds himself in, or each friendship, each kind of, there's all of these little mini journeys. It's very episodic, and each one seems very significant in the development of Maskell, but he doesn't seem to really understand how he's changing. He just suddenly changes. And I guess one thing that we should really talk about, we haven't mentioned yet, but as he progresses through land to land to land, or region to region to region, where things are very different each time, he has different sense organs that appear on his body, or are ripped off of his body, or are stabbed by someone else and replaced with another thing. There are three main ones, and each one has its own name, but they also evolve. So there is one that they're on his neck. Of course, that's in my Chinese article. Now I can't find that note, but he has things here that have a name, and I can't remember what they're called. And then he has a one from his heart, which is at first described like being a very thin tentacle, almost like a tether from his chest sticking out, and it's arm length, but it is not very thick, and that's called a mane. This thing allows you to have love connections, so to be able to love something instantly. These things on his neck are able to make him sense the kind of exist a little bit more easily, and also have more empathy towards other people. And then he also has the thing on his forehead, which later becomes an eye, and that has that's the thing that allows empathy. These things allow telepathy. So as he's going through, he picks up these new organs that help him sense things and understand torments. He abandons them. He picks up new kind of almost religions or philosophical belief systems and drops them again as he's confronted with different people on this planet. But I was thinking, Zach, the toolkit that I want to bring to this, especially with all of the idea of not necessarily all of these false things, but these things that can be used or are dangerous, but eventually need to be cast aside or kind of put back in their place. The nature of it being very dreamlike, and all of these things being quite violent, but seeming to be healthy in the context of this strange dreamlike world. And then also following something, this kind of energy force, this Muspel fire, which is also Surtur. Mm-hmm. I feel like if you took a Jungian lens to this, it would make sense. Someone going into the unconscious, he's called Muskell, and it kind of sounds like Maskell. It sounds like masked skull, someone who is representing mortality. And he is just an instrument for night spore, and spore being something which will eventually bloom, but which is now in the darkness, down in the unconscious, and eventually will come out. So it feels like Maskell is kind of the mortal, or the kind of ego, the thing that has to go down and find this stuff for night spore, and to give it the information that he needs to eventually come up again. And I think the Muspel fire is also interesting for this, because the idea of the libido being something, not the Freudian libido, but the Jungian libido, just being energy itself, and just kind of the ability to pursue one's soul, it seems to be related to the drums that he keeps hearing, because every time he's about to get stuck and say, okay, I'm going to stay here. This is the ultimate religion. This is the ultimate belief system. I'm going to stay with this archetypical character, this kind of archetype. I'm going to stay here. And then he hears the drums. Eventually he starts seeing the actual light of the Muspel fire, and then he pursues it and goes closer to Surtur. Of course, there are further complications that don't exactly make that work, but it is kind of an interesting way to look at the story of someone through dreams, listening very closely to their dreams, getting stuck in places, but also using these archetypes as guides, but then eventually having to cast them off through violence in the dream, and then still always having to follow the libido. Anytime it gets stuck, it has to be unstuck, and it has to pursue its object again.
Yeah. I think that the Jungian active imagination is also a fantastic lens to look at this book through. And I spent a lot of time thinking about that. It's, I think that what a lot of people get wrong when they're talking about this book, is a lot of people talk about each of these characters that we meet as though they are representatives of different philosophies. But it's not like he has a conversation with Hegel, and then he has a conversation with Kant, and then he has a conversation with Sartre. It's nothing like that. It's different outlooks that he's looking at, and it's different like modes of being in the world, different kind of like ways in which the material body can relate to the world. And the final thing he learns is that like being material and relating to the world in general is just being within the pleasure trap. It's being within the constructed universe, and the soul actually yearns to return back to its source. But that's neither here nor there, because like the thing is these aren't philosophies that he learns. It's their archetypes. Like you said, it's the Jungian imagination. They're archetypes that he periodically embodies. Like for each one of these people, he consumes something, he blood transfuses, he gets something from them and he starts acting like them. But then ultimately the internal contradictions of each one of these people kind of make themselves apparent, and he casts aside the archetype and moves forward. But the last thing I really want to stress that leans into this Jungian reading is that it's not that he's accumulating knowledge. It's not that he has an encyclopedic memory of the perspective of every person that he's talked to before. On the contrary, what he's accumulating is different sense organs. It's very cyberpunk in that way. You know what I mean? He gets a new organ, or he cuts off an organ, and suddenly he can see the world in a new way. He can see different light spectrums. He can see different colors. He can breathe in the atmosphere differently. He can feel other people's emotions intuitively. Like what he gets is new abilities to perceive, new perspectives upon the raw material of the world. And that's his progression through here, not accumulation of knowledge, not stacking up philosophies on top of each other.
I want to give two examples to kind of illustrate what you just said, Zach, and then ask you a question, because even with these readings, I'm still not satisfied with my kind of idea of what happens at the end. And I want to see if we can try and figure out what is the significance of Masked Skull or Maskell becoming Nightspore, becoming who he needs to become. At the very end, when he comes back with Crag and he comes back with Nightspore and he is killed, on the raft, Crag eventually tells him, okay, on Earth, I am called Pain. That's the idea of you're getting trapped in the pleasure. Pain is here. But then Nightspore, he asks Crag, okay, what was it all for then? And Crag kind of explains it away like, well, you needed to go through this just to become who you are and to get out of this pattern. But does that make sense? Like you said, we're not stacking philosophies onto each other, but for some reason we're learning them just to slough them off. Like why grow these sense organs to rip them off again if you're not actually going to accumulate any knowledge? It's just stripping away knowledge.
I think that it's a great question. Why couldn't he just skip straight to the tower at the end where he's looking through the windows? Because the revelation at the end, in a sense, it almost mimics the beginning, where he climbs up into the space observatory and that takes him to Arcturus. And then once he's on Tormance, he climbs up into the tower again and he sees the true nature of reality, which maybe after we talk about what each of the people have to say, we can talk about what that true nature of reality is a little bit more. But why does he need to take on these personalities and then slough them off? It's a great question. I think maybe, one, because it's a great story, it makes the story more interesting, but like, what do each of these personalities have that the final revelation doesn't have? What each of these people offer him is fundamentally a way of relating to the world, relating to pleasure specifically. And pleasure, I think, like pleasure and pain, when we talk about this, it's not just like, oh, ouch, stepped on a nail, what stubbed my toe, whatever people do that hurts.
Okay.
Yeah. And pleasure is not just like, when you scratch your back in that one spot and your leg kicks out like you're a dog. It's not just like feeling good. It's like you have to think of it in terms of like the amoeba. It's swimming towards the food. It's swimming towards the thing that it can eat, and it's swimming away from things that eat it. So it's like pain is anything psychological or physical that tells you something about the world is not right. And that could be, some kind of aesthetic imbalance, that could be hunger, that could be physical discomfort, that could be anything that in some way derealizes the world, that pulls you back from the world a little bit and makes you say, ooh, this isn't right. Pleasure is anything. It could be food, could be sex, could be sleep, could be, anything that maintains the sense of your body in the world is good and correct. So, like I said, we'll talk about what each of these people have to specifically say, but what I notice is the pattern is all of them have something to say about the person, the body's relationship to pleasure and pain. And in that sense, they're all telling you how to live within this material world in a way that each of them thinks is best. However, the final revelation is any relationship with the material world is bad because you are trapped here. Any relationship with the material world is just perpetuating that cycle of, the soul's birth, rebirth. And a lot of this, well, I don't know. I have to wonder how much of this is, my understanding of like Gnosticism helping read back into this. Because I don't think David Lindsay has this concept explicated about, reincarnation, birth, rebirth, the soul being trapped here again and again as a kind of like, a material world prison. But there is a very clear explicated idea that, the soul, the life force comes from somewhere else, but is then trapped here in Crystalman's creation.
And Crystalman's many crystals, many shaping crystals. It feels very negative, but I guess that is kind of the point of Gnostic fiction, is this rejection of any materiality. As you said, these guys kind of come up with their own final conclusions as they're arguing. One of them, Gangnit, however you say his name, who is just Nightspore in disguise before Maskell is killed, he is still trying to argue with Crag and saying, okay, yeah, I know what you think, Crag, but the world could not go on being without pleasure. Crag tells us, ask Crystalman, his world is no joke. He has a strong clutch, but I have a stronger. Maskell was his. So Maskell belongs to Crystalman, but Nightspore is mine.
I think we're maybe at a point where maybe we should try to talk about each of these individual characters and kind of see the path that David Lindsay is taking us on as we go through here.
Yeehaw, Zach.
When Maskell drops in, who's the first person that he meets?
Like a paratrooper. The first person that he meets is Joywind. So we've talked mostly about Joywind. Again, he gets the points, he gets the Zorb, the thing on his forehead, he gets the tentacle, they share blood, he comes back to meet Panaway, and everything there is, of course, peace, love, dope. It's all, wonderful. Everything's great.
So as we're looking at Joywind, like, I don't know, for me, I wrote down a couple keywords. Altruism, harmony, warmth, kindness. To me, it seems like he drops into this person who, as best as I can tell, like really nurtures him. And I don't know, like the first thing she does is dress him. And I couldn't help but feel reminded of like a baby just being born. And it made me feel like there's a sense in which I think Maskell has like a child-mother relationship with Joywind. I don't know. Do you feel that at all?
It seems, he can't even get up on his own without her help, and they have to trade blood. It feels very much like a child-mother relationship. She teaches him everything. It is very loving and very nurturing, but I think there's this kind of itch at the back of our minds as we're reading it that there seems to be a naivete, because even he has just gotten here and he knows something about Crag. He knows that Crag helped him get here. When she brings the name up, Crag, she mentions that he's the devil. She is very fond of Surtur, of Shaping, of Crystalman, but she says, no, they're all the same word. And Shaping is the god who walks among us, is proud of his creation, and is a lover of us. So it feels like almost like being in a mirage. She is devout, she's very kind, but it feels like they might not be able to handle any conflict, these two, Panaway and Joywind.
Yeah, maybe I feel like Panaway could handle conflict, but I feel like,
Mm.
well, I don't know. Joywind says, she says, we almost quarreled about which of us should come to you, but in the end, I won. Here she laughed. I won because I am the stronger hearted of the two, but he is purer in perception. So already we've kind of set up this dichotomy of the two are very separate and different people. And I think it's probably worth noting now, because this is something that will happen again and again. Anytime we have this dichotomy of two different characters, oftentimes it's a male female dichotomy. And I think, and what I notice is, well, as we learn later, one of the characters says, "Oh, the women give the laws." Well, this is a very Kabbalistic thing, and this is why I was initially drawn as like to the Kabbalistic framework of interpreting this. Is like, and the readings of the Kabbalah that I've done, each side of the tree of life, you travel from left to right, order to chaos, feminine to masculine. You know what I mean? Like, the feminine side is always associated with like form and structure and law, whereas the other side is always associated with kind of a bursting out, lawlessness, expansion, things like that. So like overflowing. So I just want to put a pin in this right now, because this is our first male female couple, and they seem to be, it's not, there's a yin and yang thing going on here. There's a yin and yang.
As we continue, we got to see, does that yin and yang reverse? I think it might reverse at the very end when we meet another character who is like a flash of lightning that just kills immediately, and that's another reverse of the female male here. But yeah, I think one thing that makes me think they're maybe a little bit naive is this certainty that shaping is good, no matter what. And they also they explain away some things that are a little bit peculiar, because anytime someone dies, we see like Surtur's face or Crystalman's face just show up again, and they say, well, of course, Panway says this, all creatures that resemble shaping must out of necessity resemble one another. They feel a little bit like a cult. And their refusal they only drink water, right? They don't eat animals. They don't eat vegetables. They only drink water, because they think anything that is created from shaping should not be killed or harmed. So while they are sweet, they also feel a little bit naive in the context of this world, where the earth can just suddenly lift up and just kill you. There's so many things that threaten them. However, where they live, it's quite tame. They seem suited to this region. So each philosophical system, or whatever these people represent, are also suited to their region. And I think it's a huge contrast then when we go on to Oceax, because we have the nurturing mother in Joywind, and then we meet Oceax, who she and her husband, he calls, whirlpools of evil, or whirlpools of misdeed, or something like that. We go from complete regard of human life to complete disregard of any life.
The thing, I guess, before like, it's so interesting because the next two characters seem so negative to me, and the first two seem so positive. And I think that this is kind of like the rhetorical trick that David Lindsay is playing on us, because for me, upon entering this new world, the first two people I met, I was like, oh, these are the kind of ideal of who you should be. You have the like almost Buddhist like vegetarian, don't even step on ants, only drink water, like do no harm type person. But then also with Panaway, there's a real sense of like artistic achievement, glory. He's described as like having great understanding. There's like a mental engagement with the world, so the first one has an emotional engagement, the second one has a mental engagement. I feel like he's smart by giving us two positive examples of how to live before we meet people who offend our moral sensibilities a little bit, because even though it's not supposed to be like, oh, this one's better than that one is better than that one, as we go on, I think you do get a clear sense that some people do seem to have a higher understanding, or a more like essential grasp of the nature of life than others. And in doing so, like looking back, you're like, oh yeah, the first two do have a quite shallow engagement with the world.
That's true. The tablecloth is really pulled out from under you. You've learned to trust these two, and they seem like your guides to the rest of the world. I believe that they live in Pooling Dread. Is that right? I think Joywyn and Panaway
Dread. Possibly. You know, I wrote down the names of characters and I wrote down like keywords that people describe them as. I did not write down any names of locations.
I know, I didn't think about it.
That's part of the thing that I said before. It's like you really have to figure out for yourself what is the signal and what is the noise with this book. And I realized all too late that I should have been writing down the names of the locations where they were going.
Well, I think that they, even if we're wrong, someone could tell us, but I think that they live in Pooling Dread, or at least they go to Pooling Dread together. And it makes me, again, that nominative determinism, as we've said before. It feels like in a dream world, when you're entering a dream like this, where everything is so hunky-dory and so perfect, it might be a trap for you to think, my life currently is okay, and my dreams are not trying to communicate to me anything. This is a nice little paradise. Everything is going totally smoothly. But if the place itself is called Pooling Dread, you know, there's something that's working underneath all of this dread that is pooling up.
Yeah.
And I think another part of it, while they seem very nice, there's just something that's a little like too positive. When Panaway is swimming, he suddenly goes, oh, and then like spits up a gemstone. And he tries to throw it away, but Maskell's like, that's gorgeous. What is that? And he goes and retrieves it. He says, what on earth is this? He said, did this fall from your pocket or something? He says, no, it came out of my husband. He's such an artist that he overflows with beauty. So this beauty like just comes out of him, but it's a gemstone, and he picks it up and is ashamed of it and throws it away. Yeah, it's just a dirty rock. Get it out of my sight. So there's, I think...
Hold on. Let's keep that relationship to the art you make. Let's keep that in mind in connection to the other artists we meet, because he produces a thing of beauty, but he feels shame about it and he throws it away. And I think that's very different than the other artists we meet later, but we'll talk about them as we go.
Oh God, I hope it's not the tree person. So if it's a dream journey, I feel like we're here stuck in neutral, we're idling, and while it seems very nice, we have to move on. And again, drums, I don't know if we hear them this time, but we eventually hear the trumpet. We hear Surtur pushing him on. Of course, we find out Surtur might be materiality, might be the relationship of your soul being stuck here, but it is something that is pushing Maskell on, and he has to follow. If he stays with Panaway and Joywyn, he's going to be stuck. When we get to Ossiax, she's kind of exciting. You know, she's like, okay, you're going to change. You're going to learn how to be strong here, because we're in this forest that is very dangerous. And if you go forward and you don't change now, you will die here. If you don't turn your mane into a stronger mane, whatever that was called, if you don't grow an eye, you will not be able to survive. She even teaches him how to like hail that big dragon-like insect, the Shrock. She then, while she is quite forceful and abrupt, she's pretty exciting. She sounds like an adventurer. But when we go and we meet her husband, and the whole gambit that she wants Maskell to participate in, come murder my husband, that really sends a lot of red flags. So while we've gone from, these people were maybe naive, now we've kind of gotten used to Ossiax being a necessary kind of aggressive character. Now we're suddenly shocked by, oh no, she's just completely immoral. When we get there, Crimtophon, her husband, is cultivating a person to become an idle tree, and even controlling the way this person talks. So everything they say is like how much they love being a tree. And they go, yeah, I'm excited. I've sprouted some leaves on my hands, and tomorrow I think my feet will take root. And Crimtophon is really excited. He says, tomorrow we'll be able to pluck fruit right off of him. He will no longer be an animate human. He'll be a tree. That seems absolutely, like that has gone so far away from, Ossiax is cool, to, oh no, this new town is insane.
Yeah, and I think that for these two characters, like, keywords I wrote down were violence, will, desire, and domination. And, Ossiax, she compares herself. Yeah, lust. Yeah. Oceax compares herself to the previous two people we met. She says, well, she pulled her mouth scornfully. You came through Pooling Dread, didn't you? All the people there are the same. They think life is to be looked at and not lived. Now that you are visiting Ifdon, you will have to change your notions. And what Maskell experiences is this like upswelling of will. And now he felt no wonder or curiosity at all, but only desired to meet human beings. So intense had grown his will. He longed to test his powers on his fellow creatures, and nothing else seemed of the least importance to him. If we're doing psychoanalytic terms, or like Jung, this is like libido. I guess this would be Freud, but like libido with no superego. It's desire with no restraining conscience or no restraining rationality. These people are all lust and cruelty.
It also could be a kind of evolution of the anima. So we have like a kind of mother figure. We have now a very like intense, lustful, adventurous woman who is going to lead him into the jungle. It feels like there are lots of things happening to Maskell, not just he's transforming physically. He also has something going on even within his internal psychology, even though he's kind of projected into his own, like the whole world seems to be his internal psychology, but he also is having things happening inside him. When he then, and this is where I think we see it, when he jumps on Cryptophon and just straight up murders him in a matter of seconds, like after meeting him, that feels like a huge transformation. And it feels, again, in the dream world, and people have dreams, where they murder someone like, oh my God, I'm a terrible person. What could this possibly mean? But your psychoanalyst, will likely tell you, no, that is your dream representing to you. This person is an archetype here for you. And you are potentially overcoming this archetype, or you feel like you are restrained by this kind of personality, and you are finally being assertive. So he's being assertive against this kind of lawlessness, against this immorality, and it feels like he is shocked by it and he regrets it tremendously. But he also I guess he doesn't. There's no evolution here. But for us, it seems like maybe it is. He doesn't seem cognizant of anything, but that jump seems maybe a further progression in his journey towards Muspel.
So where do we go from here? We got this character. Now, I'm going to butcher this because it's either Spadevil or Spadevil.
I think it's Spadevil, but I think that's also I was thinking potentially this could also be Spade Devil. Because someone who is so obsessed with duty and work.
Oh, yes. Okay. All right. Yeah. Yeah. My one keyword I wrote down for this character was just duty. This is a man. He does duty. I like how, and actually when I met this character, of course, I went through the same journey as Maskell. That's the thing about this book. When I met this character, I was like, this guy's awesome. I want to be just like, just like Spade Devil. But I like that he speaks in this, he speaks in this high poetic diction. We have Tiedemann saying, you know my name, also know my sex. It is death for me to intersect. And then Spade Devil says, that is the old law. I am the bearer of the new law. It is so, and will it be accepted? The old skin is cracking. The new skin has been silently forming underneath. The moment of sloughing has arrived. He just sounds, he's so cool,
He's pretty cool. Also, they meet him when they're in like that weird forest where there's lightning trees, and they're like, oh my God, if you touch that, you're dead.
Yeah.
And he just reaches in and does not hurt at all. Spade Devil's pretty cool. We skipped over, and we will skip over a few characters because there's so many. There's just this onslaught of characters. So Zach and I have kind of chosen to pick our favorite ones. So Zach just mentioned Tiedemann, and Tiedemann is someone who is the other wife of Cryptophon, who was Oceax's old husband, blah, 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 blah. But I think Spade Devil, I also liked him a lot. And I was this is where it's like, I think really convincing where, okay, Maskell is taking on new philosophical systems, because when he says, the old way is sloughing off, you will be my followers. And so when he converts Tiedemann and Maskell's organs, they suddenly become his very devout followers and say, okay, we're going to go wherever you go. But then when he goes and he meets Catil, I thought this was so just visually disturbing, this other character, Catil. And they have this kind of battle between whose religion is right. Is it duty, or is it whatever the hell Catil wants? I don't even know what the hell this guy wants, but it's horrible. Catil says, okay, you think you've learned the right thing from Spade Devil? They get into an argument. So Catil kind of really sets up this idea of, yes, this book, or at least this section, is all going to be about belief systems and seeing which one is the right one. So Catil says, okay, Spade Devil, you think duty is so great? You think abstention from pleasure and anything engagement in the world is good? I'll show you. And then he says, okay, come here, Maskell. And he gets a rock and just slashes out his third eye. So then he suddenly sees more clearly. He says, now I see the straight path, and I know that duty is not the right way forward. And this was just so disturbing. Catil says, okay, if that's the case, I want you to kill Tiedemann and Spade Devil. Maskell says, I'd really rather not. But he says, no, I want you to. So Maskell says, yeah, okay. And he picks up 2 rocks and just throws them and smashes these, kills both of these people that he's just been with. And then Catil says, that was great. And he says, okay, where do we go now, Catil? He says, I really don't care. And then just leaves. He says, okay, Maskell, you follow your heart this way. I'm out. I'm no longer participating. And Maskell says, so wait, was all of that not necessary? He says, no, it probably is necessary for you. See ya. And then gone. So that was definitely like, it kind of shows you that this book is about idea systems, but then also shows you that it's not at all about idea systems, but getting these idea systems out completely. And that, again, dream logic, destroying this old relationship is important within the dream, as horrifying as it is to us as readers when we're identifying with these characters and really liking Spade Devil and then just watching him being brutally murdered. It's a shocking book in many scenes.
Yeah. And you know what? It's interesting what you said there about like belief systems, because despite the fact that Spade Devil is discarded and moved on from, he does voice ideas which ultimately do align with the core message of the book. One quote I have from him is, he says, "Fear nothing, Maskell and Tiedemann. This pain is eating up the evil in your nature. The road you are walking cannot remain unwalked. We shall arrive before dark." So pain eats up the evil in your nature. So this idea of pain having a positive transformative effect upon human nature, upon the soul. I think that what David Lindsay wants to do is, he's not here to be like, everything is wrong except for this. I think each of these characters does have some facet of the core truth that they have access to, but maybe they're just clinging a little too tightly to that facet and unable, because they're clinging so tightly to that one facet, they're unable to see the whole picture. And this right here, Spade Devil's relationship to pain is his facet that he is holding on to.
That's very true. And every character seems to also find that there is something illusory about this world. They all will admit that, at least, where they say, yeah, something about this is not quite right, but we're going to continue on this way. And they're all very devoted. Like you said, Spade Devil, duty only, pain, good. They have a little piece, and that is the one thing they're going to hold on to. Anything else is going to be too threatening to them as an archetype, I think. It will just obliterate them. And it does, again and again and again. I want to, apparently my notes for this, Zach, are all in my essay, which I invite everyone to come read. Link in the description. No one will read it, but I want to get on to Pole Crab, a very interesting character, but I think the most interesting thing is when we meet Pole Crab's wife, and she goes to see the the musician on the island. That is such an interesting scene, and I think one scene that really inspired, potentially anyway, Tolkien. I mean, a lot of this probably inspired Tolkien, but that scene especially feels like Tolkien, so we got to get there. But we got to do Pole Crab first.
Yeah. Oh, I want to talk Tolkien, but real quick, I do want to say that Pole Crab is another one of those characters where I was immediately like, oh, this man's got it right. This man's got it right. For him, he understands. I mean, he says, quote, "This life seems to me all wrong." He says, "I live by killing, and so does everybody." He says, "So maybe life of any kind is wrong, and Surtur's world is not life at all, but something else." He's a person who, okay, so we, with Joy Wend, it's like she lived harmoniously with the world, but actually her version of harmoniously is like, don't touch anything. It's like being inside of, like grandma's house, and everything is perfectly placed and everything's really clean, but don't you touch that, But with Pole Crab, Pole Crab is your own house, and everything is nice, but you touch all of it. And it's really dirty, and I got dust everywhere. There's crap everywhere in here. You know what I mean? Pole Crab is someone who lives in the world, recognizes that it's wrong, and just says, "I'm going to go fish." I'm not trying to do anything extra. Let's cook and eat some fish. I'm Pole Crab.
I love Pole Crab. He is great. He sees through it all, just like you said, and they have a full conversation. He seems to be probably the wisest person that we've met so far, but just doesn't seem to care. Like he's cooking his fish in the weird, thermal baths underneath the sand. It's tragic too, because he seems so great. He's devoted to his 3 kids. He's really interested in their 3 futures. And then we meet his wife. Here I've got her actual name, Gleamil. And Gleamil says, "I am also conscious of 2 worlds," because she's been listening to them this whole time. She's like behind a tree listening to them. She comes out and says, "I am also conscious of 2 worlds. My husband and boys are real to me, and I love them fondly. But there is another world for me, as there is for you, Maskell, and it makes my real world appear all false and vulgar." Now, Pole Crab, we've been settled. He's great. I would personally like to spend more time with him, but we quickly leave and we go with Gleamil because she says, "Look, Maskell, I'm going to take you to this place where there's this musician who in a line of 2 musicians, because the old one died and new one replaced him, on this island, all they do is play music that is so tragic you'll die." So you go there and no one has survived. And of course, when they eventually get there, it's just surrounded by bones. There's just bones everywhere because people have gone and listened to the music and just died immediately, as it says on the tin. I think she is also a very interesting character to go from nice, cozy Pole Crab saying, "Look, Clay, I don't want you to go because I know you will not return, but I know if you need to go and hear that music, which to you represents a deeper truth than everything we've accepted here, if you need to go, I'll let you go." It's a tragic little mini domestic story, a little mini love story. But I think if we get into this music part, Zach, that's where we're really going to get Tolkien.
Yeah. Well, tell me more, because so I was thinking the exact same thing when we got to Tolkien. I guess first we should talk about what this person's, theory of beauty is, and then we can talk about how this relates to Tolkien's The Silmarillion. I guess we both read this and we were both like, "Ha! I got you, J.R.R." But so Earthrid basically has this theory of beauty. He's saying most artists work by creating simple pleasure, creating harmony, creating symmetry in the world. His art works by organizing pain into structures and creating asymmetry. I'll read a quote from him. He says, "Men, when they make music, are accustomed to build beautiful tones on account of delight they cause. Therefore, their music world is based on pleasure. Its symmetry is regular and charming. Its emotion is sweet and lovely. But my music is founded on painful tones, and thus its symmetry is wild and difficult to discover. Its emotion is bitter and terrible." So, average noise musician in 2025, I guess.
I thought it was great. It is like the average noise musician. So Lindsay was really into music, and so all of his books, at least many of his books, especially The Haunted Woman, will feature music, and it feels almost like he wants to bring it in, kind of like Algernon Blackwood wanted to bring the Wagner the Tannhauser March into that other story at the end of Doctor Silence. Sorry,
the detective
brains is really
guy.
the detective story. So anyway, you hear this music, and then suddenly, a victim of higher space. That's what it is. You hear this music, and then it will affect the kind of thinning of the kind of barrier between you and another dimension, especially if you already have some sort of recourse with this dimension. You can come back to your regular dimension, and then suddenly you hear that music. Oh no, the veil is too thin, and you go up there. It feels like for him, he wants to get music into his stories to explore what it does to our relationship with our maybe psyche, maybe with feelings underneath our everyday feelings, or just maybe the kind of pleasure that comes along with music.
And this isn't the only time music shows up in this. When they do the seance, there's music playing in the background. He specifically says the composer, if you want to look up, I didn't look it up myself, but you could look up what music is playing, and then the drum beats that are kind of propelling them along throughout the story. Even before they leave Earth, there's drum beats in the background that he hears off in the distance, and it takes them closer to Surtur's ocean. So music is a key thing for David Lindsay.
Yes, anytime you hear a drum beat with the accent on the 3, you could be following Muspel, dun 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 dun. And then you have to go and follow that light. It becomes very Tolkien-esque when in this story, because Swaylone is the original musician on the island, and he was just a very gifted musician and played the beautiful tones, as you described, Zach. And eventually he wanted to insert all of these kind of all these discordant tones. But that happened because he's playing so beautifully, the gods get involved. So Shaping goes and says, or Surtur goes and says, this is so beautiful. I would like to make your music even more compelling, even more magical. So I'm going to give you kind of some of my special powers into your music, infuse it with me. Crag, in almost a Jobian kind of deal where Crag and basically the devil and God are talking, and they're saying, okay, you think your music is so great, I'm going to show you what real music is. And God says, okay, I'll let you go try it, Crag. So Crag goes, and for every beautiful note, he adds an ugly note. For every bit of happiness, he adds suffering. For every kind of positive, he adds a negative, and that makes it even more beautiful. And it attracts people because it seems to be a deeper reality. And it reminded me very much of Eru Ilúvatar. Sorry, I can't pronounce things anymore, Zach, but in the Silmarillion, it begins with Eru Ilúvatar and all of the oh no, what are they called, Zach?
Melkor.
Maior? No, Melkor's the bad guy. Oh. The Valar, right?
It's been
Valar.
So long, Bob.
Valar?
It's been so
long. Let me just look. This
the
is
Valar, yeah.
Sorry.
The Valar.
The Valar? Valar. There's the Maior and the Valar. Sorry. Let me just look that up because that's important. I don't want to sound like an idiot on that. Okay. So Eru Ilúvatar and all of the Valar are going to be playing music. Eru Ilúvatar is kind of the conductor and making all of the main music, but in the Silmarillion, this is how Middle-earth and all of existence comes about. All of materiality comes about from music. And it's all very beautiful music. And as Eru Ilúvatar is kind of conducting and also setting the main tones of the music, the other Valar are adding things that contribute to make things more beautiful. They're adding things like creatures. They're adding things like the sea. They're adding things like trees by playing their music. However, Melkor, who's not called Melkor at that point, but anyway, he wants to add discordant music. And so he keeps adding discordant music. Ilúvatar says, stop doing that. But then they start again, and he keeps doing it again. It feels very similar, where you have beautiful music and then discordant music, and that kind of sets the story off. So similarly, in this world, in Tormance, we have the beautiful kind of joy wind, pan-away-like existence of everything is fine, but it's not quite reality. So when you add that discord into it, it becomes more real.
What I like about Earthrid or at least the Earthrid scene, is like his way of embodying Earthrid is he picks up the instrument. You know what I mean? It's almost like the samurai duel scene, you know, like they meet in this desolate landscape, and I mean, he survives the music of Earthrid, which kills everyone else. And then he says, okay, my turn. And he plays something that just rips the limbs off of Earthrid. It's like extraordinarily violent. If like even in a story which is already kind of violent in places, it felt like just it raised the bar for violence, I thought, a little bit.
In a land full of bones, and then poor Earthrid's legs get shot. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah.
It gets violent.
So next up, we have a really interesting character. Oh my gosh, I'm going to butcher this pronunciation. Li Hao Fei. I don't know why the three syllables really gets me, but this character's really interesting. So it's not he or he, she, but it's actually a different pronoun, a, which the idea here, I believe, it's not that a is like a separate third gender, but that Li Haofei is in some sense like it's a or all gender into one. Do I have that right?
I don't know if it's necessarily all genders into one. It's completely genderless, and they're older than any of the other beings. They remind me a lot. Li reminds me a lot of the of the kind of lightning beings in the Roger Zelazny story, where they all go to the other planet, and it's all based on Hindu gods. Those lightning people that live in the underground caves and have to be rescued out of there, and they just shoot up into existence until they can be captured. Because Li Haofei is kind of a ether person.
Yeah. I was thinking of angels. You know, Li Haofei is kind of a higher order of being. Like you said, an ether person, you know, just something a little higher up on the spiritual ladder than us common folk.
So yes, as Maskell is interfacing or interacting with Li Haofei, the A, he says that it feels like Air Lover was none other than Shaping himself. So it feels like this being is so old that they are actually the lover of Shaping. And it's as if they dropped out of another age when creation was different. That's what he says. Then Li Haofei says, nowadays there are men and women, but in the olden times, the world was peopled by Feans. I think I am the only survivor of all of those beings who were then passing through Faisani's mind.
Passing through Faisani's mind. And I think this right here is one of the first truly like Gnostic ideas. No, it's not the first Gnostic idea, but like this is really part and parcel of it. Like the idea that the world itself has passed through or is part of or is a thought of a kind of demiurge being, a creator being. There's a really great paragraph. Ooh, it's kind of a couple paragraphs, but I think it's worth reading because it presents this idea of what we consider to be the outer world is actually the inner world of this being Faisani, which is just another word for shaping, is just another word for crystalmen. Anyway, so it says, life is the thoughts of Faisani, and once these thoughts have left his brain, they are nothing, mere dying embers. This is a cheerless philosophy, said Maskell. But who is Faisani himself then, and why does he think at all? Li Haofei gave another wrinkled smile. That I'll explain too. Faisani is of this nature. He faces nothingness in all directions. He has no back and no sides, but is all face. And this face is his shape. It must necessarily be so, for nothing else can exist between him and nothingness. His face is all eyes, for he eternally contemplates nothingness. He draws his inspirations from it. In no other way could he feel himself. For the same reason, Feans and even men love to be in empty places and vast solitudes, for each one is a little Faisani. And then he continues. Maskell says, that rings true. So, but he gives an idea of what the specific mechanism is. He says, thoughts flow perpetually from Faisani's face backwards. So as his face is on all sides, however, they flow into his interior. A draught of thought thus continually flows from nothingness to the inside of Faceny, which is the world. The thoughts become shapes and the people the world. This outer world, therefore, which is lying all around us, is not outside at all as it happens, but inside. The visible universe is like a gigantic stomach, and the real outside of the world we shall never see. And Moskal ponders this. So really vivid, kind of beautiful image, but also kind of like monstrous too.
The idea of it being the visible universe is like a giant stomach. It sounds very Berkeleyan. It sounds like Bishop Berkeley and the idea of the mind in a vat. Again, we've come back to like what feels like a full philosophical system where you are not an individual outside of someone, outside of another brain. You are actually inside of that brain thinking these thoughts, and you are only passing in and out of these thoughts. It's interesting. It goes, again, kind of away from Berkeley and goes back to what feels more Jungian too, because as Lee Halfay is explaining all of this and explaining how Faceny works, and we're all little bits of Faceny, he also says, or they also say, that it is, for a Feyan, there's no one half, it's a complete being. So in that, you are a complete being because you're half woman and half man. It feels like, again, being so in touch with your animus or your anima that you've completely learned and you've become a more whole soul. You've been integrated with your soul, so you know which direction your soul wants to go. Your libido is kind of in the right order, I guess. So it feels like we could be trapped in this place. We could be Bishop Berkeley, or we could be an individual who has come and learned from that and can move on. How does it feel like for Moskal, someone moving forward and sloughing off these different knowledge systems? Are we going to attach ourselves to this idea of a brain in a vat, or are we going to attach ourselves to this as a complete person?
Well, it's hard because I feel like with Lee Halfay's vision of Faceny, like it gives us an idea of the characteristic of the universe, the mechanism of the universe, but it doesn't necessarily tell us how to live, except, I suppose, in the way that Lee Halfay has this kind of like, I guess what I would characterize, I characterize Lee Halfay as a kind of like romantic. And by that, I mean, like the 19th century, 18th century romantics, you know, a very strong concern with the sublimity, beauty, finding order in the natural world and kind of reveling in that, and finding a spiritual dimension to the order of the cosmos. So I feel like what Lee Halfay is really all about is like, yes, this is a character of the universe, but your job isn't to try to escape it or become anything of it. Your job is to ponder it and admire it.
So after we get this idea of, woman is half of life, man is half of life. If you are together, you have something that if you're not, it's gone. It says something else has dropped out of it. And we also have this idea of we have to stare at this thing or contemplate being inside of this brain or contemplate being part of Faceny. We then move on to a new character, Korpang, who I think also is telling us something similar to Faceny, but now it's broken. Instead of one face with many, many, many eyes that sees all of these things, that has all existence within its own face, now we get three distinct beings, three distinct gods. And I think we depart quite a bit away from this initial idea. However, this person still seems to think that Faceny is a part of this equation. Korpang says, no, it's not just Faceny. There's actually three. Existence is in Faceny's world, but relation is in Amphuse's world, and feeling is in Thyre's world, or Thyre's world. So now we split off into a tripartite division of Faceny, and Faceny is only one part. So now we have three different gods suddenly.
Three gods, three dimensions, three worlds. I can't tell.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, because it's so hard with this book because you're being asked to come to terms with a new vision every chapter. You know what I mean? But wow, Bob, we just lost all internet. So we are picking back up at a later moment to finish this thing out. Okay, so I think we were talking about Korpang?
Korpang, yes. Korpang. Zach, before we begin, I've been thinking about this since we lost internet and we're in an abyss. I feel like this book... Have you ever played sports, Zach?
Um, um, the fact that I don't know how to answer that probably tells you everything you need to know.
Okay. Well, I played baseball once. And I remember the ball coming, and I had the mitt. I was thinking, I got it, and I didn't have it at all. I feel like this book is that. When we were recording the first time, I was like, I understand this. Now I've had some time to think. I don't think I understand this book at all, but it sure has been fun. And I think let's continue with Corpang. Yeah. I want to talk.
Well, I want to say, when I heard that Harold Bloom read this book 18 times, I was like, you don't need to read
100, but 18
times.
Makes more sense.
Oh, 100. Well, I'll take one or the other. But I was like, I was like, you don't need to read it that many times. But then just like opening it up or like looking at what other people have to say, like doing close readings of it, I was like, oh, I totally missed that. Or, oh, this minor detail that he's describing this one person is actually a huge, not spoiler, but foreshadowing for the later it really, which we're not really getting into too much of any of that. But I guess I'm saying is, if you're watching this now and you feel like you don't get it, just read it 17 more times. It will all become clear.
Yeah. And then write a novel that tanks.
Yeah.
And that you're ashamed of. I think Chris from Liminal Spaces said it best. Like, I read this, I didn't want to break it down too much. I just wanted to experience the ride because it is a crazy ride and it is, I don't even know if it's breakdownable, but we sure are trying. Zach, I watched this really great, strange, weird, we're going to talk about it in the sources video, but rock opera about Arcturus. And I think one of the best scenes is this scene with Corpang when he brings Maskell to these three gods, and they are giant statues. They're gigantic statues, but in the musical, it's just three people wearing like a light up skull mask and sitting there. And then each one sings at the Maskell character. I thought this was a very interesting turn where we've had so many things sloughed off, so many things denied, so many things rejected, and we've kind of denied every possible religion, every possible belief system, but now we get three suddenly.
So what I think is interesting about this is what Corpang is doing is he's not really giving us three visible worlds. He's giving us almost dimensionalities of the world. And in my notes, I've been kind of like peppering them with just kind of like keywords about each person. And I put monk and theologian about Corpang because what he's giving us to me feels like kind of a long exercise in theology. But I think in order to talk about this, I'm just going to have to read some quotes. Okay, so he says there are three states of perception, and they are the three worlds. Existence is Facini's world. Now, we've already identified Facini as crystal men. He's called Facini because he faces in every direction, yada, yada, yada. Relation is Amphusa's world, and feeling is Thyre's world or Thyre's world. So we got existence. Oh, wait, no. Existence, relation, feeling corresponds to Facini, Amphusa, Thyre. Okay. So he says the first world is visible, tangible nature. It was created by Facini out of nothingness, and therefore we call it existence. Okay, so we have the material realm, tangible nature. The second world is love, by which I don't mean lust. Without love, every individual would be entirely self-centered and unable to deliberately act upon others. Without love, there would be no sympathy. Not even hatred, anger, or revenge would be possible. These are all imperfect and distorted forms of pure love. Interpenetrating Facini's world of nature, therefore, we have Infuse's world of love or relation. Okay, so first world is every object in the world, every person in the world, everything made of matter. But then that second layer is each thing's relationship with each other thing. I think, if you want to get away from like emotions, if you want to get away from like love and hate, I think you could think of like gravity. They talk about gravity and space-time, every object has a gravitational relationship with every other object because they're, curves of space-time based off of their mass. So think of it like that. Like everything has its own relationship. Now, that relationship is all love, but he's saying that these different emotions that you could feel to someone, including hatred or lust, those are warped forms of love. But love is the baseline material of this second world.
Do you think that these could correspond to the evolving sense organs? We have the poins, which are here on the neck, which I believe are kind of for sensing the world a little bit better and also using telepathy. They get adapted eventually to be able to perceive, I think, more deeply of the world, of what's going on. And then there's the breve, which is on the forehead, which eventually turns into the zorb. And that also helps you, I think, be more empathetic towards people. And it's also relational. Eventually that gets turned into 3 eyes and then eventually 6 eyes. And that evolves into, perceiving to seeing that there's 2 versions of the world. And then there's also the main, which is the connection of the heart, which causes love. It feels like in Corpang's idea of 3 gods and 3 realms here, it also is similar to the evolution of these sense organs.
I think you're really onto something here. That's a really good point that I totally was not tracking at all. Yeah. I do think it's also worth noting that his extra organs aren't just giving him like empathetic insight and insight into love. They're also giving him more insight into the material realm as well. So they're not just acting on the second world, but sometimes he'll say like, "Oh, I could see the cloud. I could see the cloud clearer now," or he could see different colors, or he could see like things appear more realistic and clear. So, but then the question is, are those organs also working upon the third world, which I'll get into now? This third world, he calls it feeling. It's Thyra's world. And he explains it as this. He says, length and breadth together without depth give flatness. Okay, so length and breadth. So imagine a 2D object is what he's saying. There's no depth. It's just flat. Life and love together without feeling produce shallow, superficial creatures. So he's saying if you have the first world material and the second world love, you're actually a shallow, superficial person. You need feeling, this third part. He says, quote, feeling is the need of men to stretch out towards their creator. And he says, you mean prayer and worship? And he says, I mean intimacy with Thyre. This feeling is not to be found in either the first or second world. Therefore, it is a third world. Just as depth is the line between object and subject, feeling is a line between Thyre and man. But what is Thyre himself? Thyre is the afterworld. So the way I view this is not just a sense of like, maybe there's 3 ways that we could think of this. One, a kind of spiritual orientation of the self. So like, the kind of orientation that says, oh, these synchronicities have greater meaning. That's one way of looking at it. The other way would be something like a being towards death. Someone who is aware of their journey closer and closer to the afterlife at all times. So they're, in one sense, their mind is always thinking about their own mortality. But then the third one would be, like someone who chases after the sublime. The sublime is not just beautiful. The sublime opens your soul to something divine, really. It's an experience of beauty that is fundamentally transformed into the soul. Each of these 3 things I've said don't seem to adequately capture what he's talking about here, but I think they're all kind of gesturing in the right dimension to capture what he's talking about, feeling, that third dimension of depth.
And he is devoted to Thyre. So the dimension of depth is the most important to him, and he worships Thyre. And he's trying to lead Maskell to do the same. Of course, they eventually get distracted because they hear Muspel again, and they decide to leave all of a sudden. And suddenly he gives up this whole idea of these gods. But what do you think? Why are we being... It seems really apt a description for what's going on in this book. Maskell relating to different people, learning from them, having episodes where that love, that connection becomes tainted or broken or something. The idea of the mane, which originally was a tentacle to connect and love, becomes a tentacle for lust and domination, for exerting one's will over someone else and taking what you want. It seems like this is quite a good religious system within the environment of Tormance. Why tear this one away too? Why do you think we're going to build this one up and then tear it away? Why is this one not going to be sufficient?
Great question, and I can only speculate. There's this bit of conversation I didn't read where Maskell says, I still don't understand. Do you believe in three separate gods, or are these merely three ways of regarding one god? And he says, there are three gods, for they are mutually antagonistic, yet they are somehow united. And reading that, I was like, well, wait a minute. Like reading that after having finished the book, I was like, that's not really what the final revelation is. There's not three gods. What I suspect, the reason why this doesn't work, why this is cast aside, is because it becomes a kind of theological system. It is a linguistic overlay, like a linguistic cultural overlay over the actual reality, the actual spiritual reality of what's going on here. As for how and why Maskell decides this isn't 100% true, or how he discards this, it's not as clear for me. But we do seem to know that it's not the final picture of reality that we end up with.
I think it's, again, Muspel coming in to interrupt things. So it's not necessarily Maskell having a logical conclusion. It's just suddenly he hears it and he realizes, okay, that's the thing I got to pursue. Again, if that's potentially libido, maybe he's suddenly realizing, okay, my energy has to course that way. Of course, we're going to come to a problem with that idea later. But as soon as they both hear it, even Corpang says, okay, this is not right. It says his face swells with anger and he says, life is clearly false. I have been seeking Thyre for a lifetime, and now I find this. And they just leave. They go on. They know that this is not the answer that they have to, that they're going to stick with. And again, that has been a reoccurring theme for Maskell. Yes, I have a nice little life here now. I understand these things. No, I have to cast all of these things away. I have to change my sense organs again, and I have to get rid of all these friends and probably murder them. When you're in a dream, I don't murder you in my dreams, Zach. I hope you don't murder me in my dream. Well, you're not in my dreams. I hope you don't murder me in your dreams.
I'm not making any promises, Bob.
Okay. Well, anyway.
Sorry.
Now, thanks, Zach. We're coming into a part when I first read this part, when we're going to meet Hanta in just a second. I was like, oh my God, this feels like that ICP Miracles video. I was like, how many?
Okay, tell me more.
Everything's swimming underwater, please. It feels like, I've seen shit that will shock your eyelids. It feels like that's what's going on here, just thing after thing after thing. The second time I read it, I really liked Hanta just because he's a wild, crazy, barbarian character. He's pretty fun and strange, and he's also introducing us into a really weird world. But I think this is maybe when people start to reach an exhaustion point with this book, where it's like, okay, one more brand new system, and everything that you felt comfortable with or started to get used to is gone again, and you have to start fresh with Hanta.
Yeah. I also think that, I don't know. I think that this might be the part where a lot of people lose their patience with it, because from what I've seen, one of the biggest critiques I see of this book is the gender essentialism of it. Mm-hmm. He talks about what it is to be male or masculine, what it is to be feminine or female. Obviously, he's not using these words in the same way that we use them today. But I do think that this is very much part of the maybe the occult tradition he's working from, or at least the philosophic tradition he's working from. I mean, at least, what little I know of Kabbalah, you start with the Godhead at the top, and then part of the transition into the material world is first splitting into the masculine and the feminine. So it's within many occult frameworks, there's this idea that there is a kind of cosmic femininity, cosmic masculinity. And I think that with these two characters, and especially with these two characters so close to the final revelation, leaving them to the very, very end of the sequence, I do think he's playing off of this a little bit. or playing off of this is the wrong word. I think he's working within a well-established tradition.
I would really like to see how. I think it's more important than I'm giving it credit for, and I think it might be really essential. The opposition between Hanta and Sullenbode, who we'll meet in just a second, but like in their world, he says when he meets Maskell, you're a man, woman. You have both elements within you, but for us, you're either all man or all woman. And so we have Hanta, who has these two male stones. I want to talk about that more. Later, we're going to meet Sullenbode, who is like lightning. And if they come together, there's going to be an explosion. Yeah.
I got to say, I did not think twice about two male stones until you said it out loud. Oh, boy. Yep.
It's my favorite part about him. He's got these two stones that are very science fiction. They repel the like feminine energy sparks, I guess, that are just around in nature. And somehow these male stones, which he carries around and he constantly refers to, it's just like he's holding his balls, around, showing everyone his balls. But he has his male stones. Let him hang. He puts one on a boat, one on the other side of the boat to let the boat float, because somehow these balls, kind of like the Yoni egg from way back with Oceax, but these balls propel the boat through space, and then also they allow him to survive if he gets too close to one of the women in his world, in his environment, again, in his region. And we get to meet that person, that's Sullenbode. He says that there are other women, but it doesn't seem like that's true. It kind of seems like there's only Hanta and only Sullenbode. That's the weird thing about this book. You keep coming to these different regions, but it's always only like 2 or 3 people, and no one else seems to exist. And they define, they're the archetypical people. They're almost the stereotypes of that place, and they define that place as well. Balls, Zach. He had them in his hand.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And that point about them destroying each other, or if he loses his stones, he'll be destroyed. Like, I think that there's really like a matter, like the way we're setting this up is like a matter antimatter relationship. Should these two meet, it's immediate annihilation. And I think that aspect of it plays into like the purity of Hanta's masculine principle and Sullenbode's feminine principle. They really are just 100% of, each end of this, which makes me want to ask you, when he says that Maskell is part masculine and part feminine, how did you understand that? Do you think that he is saying that like Maskell, by virtue of, like within the context of this world, because of the things he's done, he's part masculine, part feminine? Or do you think that maybe he's saying like anyone lower than Hanta or in Sullenbode in the cosmic order, anyone who comes after them, everything is part masculine, part feminine?
I think everything is part masculine, part feminine, because he also rejects Korpang. And we've just met, Lihalfa, the A, who is neither feminine or masculine. So we've suddenly gone on a complete route of all, it's all about masculine and feminine, it seems. There's always been a hint of it going on throughout the story, but now we're very much focused on it. And again, if we looked at the idea of like some of the Jungian psychology, maybe this again is the evolution of the anima within Maskell, coming to grips with his own inner feminine and learning and seeing different kinds of feminine guides. Because there's how much can you really buy into necessarily how the animus and anima work? But the idea of the anima is the first one you will meet usually in dreams will be all physical attraction. That's called the Eve. Eventually it becomes an idealistic attraction. That's called the Helen. Then it becomes, what's the other one? There's one right after that one. But the final one is Sophia, and that is the kind of love of inner knowledge or something like that. Oh, Mary is the love of spiritual and the virtuous. But the final one is Sophia. It feels like maybe there's a progression of his relationship with different women in here. And again, all of these characters kind of seem like internal characters or characters that are within one person's psychology, just like exploded out onto a planet. And it feels like that might be what we're coming to this woman, Sullenbode, who has to be kind of awakened and then is attached to whoever awakes her permanently. So it feels like that might be kind of the trajectory that we're going on as we get to this kind of ridiculous Hanta character who is only male. And then we're going to reject him, see that he can't even survive coming up against any feminine, and then Maskell gets to take his turn and see can he be even around Sullenbode and kind of overcome what held Hanta back. After throwing poor Hanta stones into the river. Oh.
Well, there's two things I want to say about Hanta. Two quick details that I think this is how like masculinity is characterized, like the purest dose of masculinity. First, this idea that the feminine is synonymous with law. So I'll just read the quote. Hanta smiled sarcastically. A secret in your ear, Maskell. All laws are female. A true male is an outlaw, outside the law. Maskell says, I don't understand. The great body of the earth is continually giving out female particles, and the male parts of rocks and living bodies are equally continually trying to reach them. That's gravitation. Actually, I probably didn't need to read that second part right there. That's just a whole other thing. But we did learn what gravitation is, thank God. But anyways, this idea that like the feminine is just laws. It's just those damn rules. Mom said I couldn't have cookies for breakfast. But the male, that's the outlaw. That's
the outlaw. Stuffing his face with cookies. It gets to the Gnostic here again, or it gets to kind of the metaphysical, because he also says that for him, the feminine is heavy sweetness without individual shapes. It is the I guess, lack of will, the kind of mire or the kind of set, like this is matter without actually any animation. So for him, it feels like these male stones are going to propel things into motion. Again, it becomes almost like physics here. And I think his misconception of how things are going on has to be rejected. But again, I'm not really sure where we're going after this, but he does seem like an essential character.
Yeah. And, a lot of the like occult understandings of this, which probably go back to, ancient Greek philosophy, of which Gnosticism has sprung, is basically like the feminine principle is that which gives things form, like in a Platonic sense, the form of this, the form of that, undifferentiated matter takes the form of table, takes the form of Zach, takes the form of microphone, and that form part of it is feminine. But what gives things life, what gives them movement, that is the masculine aspect. And maybe you could also apply this to like egg versus, a semen, like one of them moves and, one's a swimmer and one just is a, it's a shape. It's an egg. Anyways, that's my understanding of part of the long tradition that this is coming from.
The matter and the batter. He brings back the three element again, but now he's using it in colors, which I thought was very interesting. Earlier we had the Korpang's idea of three different gods. He brings it up very quickly because they ask him, like, you are an interesting color. He says, yes, I'm Dolm. It's a mix of Ulfire and blue. And then he starts telling them about how the colors work. He says, very similar to what Korpang said earlier. He says, blue is existence. It is darkness seen through light, a contrasting of existence and nothingness. Yellow is relation. In yellow light, we see the relation of objects in the clearest way. Red is feeling. When we see red, we are thrown back on our personal feelings. As regards the Alpine colors, blue stands in the middle and therefore is not existence but relation. Ulfire is existence, so it must be a different sort of existence. He defines the three colors of one sun and three colors of another sun because they have 5 total primary colors. But it's interesting for him. It's almost the exact same thing as what Korpang said. So we see that it can be rejected twice. It used to be names for gods, and they were different kinds of relation. Now it's just the names for the colors, and they also represent their stand-ins for different kinds of relation.
It's really interesting, the idea of moving, like the same relation, but moving from a personified understanding of it. It's gods that do this, to a kind of like electromagnetic function of the universe that's doing this. It's like, to me, it's very like reminiscent of the movement between, like the ancient Greek pantheon understanding of why do storms happen versus like maybe a more, modern scientific notion of like forces and resistances and electricity, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, it's interesting. One thing I want to say about colors real quick is that I did hear that a lot of the color theory in this book is actually with reference to Goethe's color theory.
Oh, I was wondering. Yeah.
Yeah. It's been, God, 15 years since I read that, so I couldn't say a single thing about that book. But yeah.
That's very interesting. It does. This book, in some ways, feels like Faust Part 2, where it's like you're thrown so many different references, and it feels like it's just to throw things together. But apparently, there's something that can be cooked out of this. There's some kind of alchemical thread going through this. So it's interesting that he is studying Goethe to do the colors here, and that they're that essential.
Yeah. So how about that Solenbode?
Solenbode is great. So she's introduced to us by Hanta. He says that don't expect anything pleasant. In spite of what just has occurred, she is not a woman, but a mass of pure sex. Your passion will draw her out into a human shape, but only for a moment. If the change were permanent, you would have endowed her with a soul. So she is like a force of nature too. She's like this lightning bolt that if you get too close to her, you're just like destroyed. What happens to Hanta when he goes and approaches her? Because Maskell, for some reason, wanted to, he's like, okay, you're going to be just as at risk as I will be. So he takes Hanta's stones, throws them into the river. That was his only defense against Solenbode. When Hanta goes up to Solenbode, he just goes up to like try and kiss her, and then, probably deservedly, his head splits open and he's just instantly killed. It says he's split from top downward into two halves, streaming with strange colored blood, as if he'd been struck with an axe. So it's really like just getting struck right through with lightning approaching Solenbode. So when Maskell goes up, he is going to also try and interact with Solenbode, and it works, and she suddenly becomes conscious, and she has, what is called a soul at this point. She is now like a regular human being. She's no longer just lightning. And so she says, okay, I'm going to help you, and we'll go wherever we want. So now he has another companion. It feels very similar to that first friend, Joywind, who seemed almost maternal, nurturing, but pretty quickly, he and Solenbode seem to fall in love. They have a very nice relationship. In the 1979 movie, it's not a very long movie, it's like an hour, and there is a huge chunk of just the Solenbode and Maskell relationship, of them having lots of fun, building a sandcastle, running around at the beach. Yeah. And it's all like, the movie's really interesting because for each kind of relationship or region, they use one of the different colors, trying to like figure out exactly what Ulfire is, but they use really bright blue filter, a really bright gold filter. And this one's like the most pleasant, beautiful, like heaven-like gold. And it's a good 15 minutes of what's only an hour movie. And it's just a montage of them having lots of fun together and having a nice relationship. It feels like the focus for that movie was, okay, he almost had a good answer here with Solenbode, and she seems like she's going to be a great guide for Maskell. But he gets eventually distracted, and we learn, okay, we have to depart from her too. But that was also like leaving Pole Crab, who was great, just a buddy who's going to go fishing. It seems really unfortunate to leave Solenbode, who seems to be the love of Maskell's life.
It is. And gosh, there was a really interesting idea kind of playing out here. It's something that really gave me a lot of food for thought. So we get this idea that like when he stops loving her, she will disappear into nothingness. She'll die, basically. Much like almost every other character in this story. They all wind up dead or God knows where. But they have this idea that love can't go back. It has to always go on. He says, "Do you regret anything?" She says, "No, Maskell, nothing. I regret nothing." He says, "Your feelings are unchanged." She says, "Love can't go back. It can only go on." And he says, "Yes, eternally on. It is so." She says, "No, I don't mean that. There is a climax, but when the climax has been reached, love, if it still wants to ascend, must turn to sacrifice." And he says, "That's a dreadful creed." And he says it in a low voice, and he turns pale beneath his coating of mud. It's a fun detail. He's covered in mud. But like, this idea that like you can't love higher and higher and higher and higher forever. At some point, love has to turn into sacrifice, which is like a new idea for me. But I think if I was going to like put a kind of like idiom with it or like a cliche next to it. It's like, if you love something, let it go, you know? So this idea of like love won't last. You have to at some point sacrifice and say goodbye. I don't know. It stuck with me. Give me a little bit to chew on.
It seems what's happening continually with all of these things that, okay, here's great positivity, love, but then there's always whatever Cragg invented to go underneath love that will eventually spoil it. It's the same idea of having these different organs which are eventually spoiled or, evolved, whatever it is. But it seems that they have a very pure intention to begin with. The main, for example, love. When Oshiox turns it into an arm, lust. Again, Cragg coming in and sweeping it out, because eventually Solenbode and Maskell, they continue this conversation of, okay, our relationship's going to be great. It's all about love, 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 love. And then eventually she says that they start talking about happiness. And they say, okay, but are you happy? She says, no, love is not happiness. And she says, I wish that love could just be something that crushes you, crushes you, crushes you, crushes you until you are no more. Something like that. It's this idea of being lovesick, being obsessed, being brokenhearted, and all of that comes with love. It's all of that stuff that Cragg has snuck in underneath love, the positivity, all the sourness that also creeps in. And they say that will be no longer love extending and going on and ascending. It feels like love will become crushing, 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 crushing.
I can't remember if we've talked much about pain in this conversation, but like, to me, it gets back to, this pain that seems to underlie everything in this planet. And there's a lot of characters in this he meets who, on first glance, you would think like, yeah, just stay with them. They seem like great people. That's the one. But there's always this element of pain and uncomfortableness. And especially when he moves into a new area, it's always pain, uncomfortableness. And I feel like, we get the sense that pain is the thing that draws you back towards the true nature of reality, draws you back to Sartre, as we kind of learn in this. And I feel like that element of like, yeah, he's found true love. He could stay with this person. And yet there is this pain here, this pain of loss, this pain of leaving. Like, no matter what good thing there is, there's always an element that reminds you that he's stuck in the material realm and that his home is somewhere else, someplace else.
I'm going to throw the same question I threw at you earlier, Zach. This is such an interesting idea of pain and having to discard these different things, building something up just so you can break it down again. Why go through this perfect relationship to then decide, okay, no, this is not what we want? Why is Solenbode there? And why is Maskell able to survive? I mean, for one, because Haunt is dead immediately. Maskell should be dead too. He's proven that he is very hardy and he can seem to survive anything. But why is there this perfect relationship? And then if they leave, she dies, he continues. It feels like when he goes near to the very end of the book, he is completely uninterested in life. He's completely uninterested in even seeing Alspain, I think the second sun, the blue sun, the sunrise. And he seems to be kind of disinvested with life. Do you think that is the point, to have been so brokenhearted that he is no longer attached to anything? Is it like a discarding of attachments one by one? Or is there something counter to what we said earlier about sloughing off, discarding things? Is there something that he has had to learn in order to transform by having this relationship with Solenbode before he makes his final transformation?
Great questions. I don't know. I almost feel like it's like tilling the soil of the soul. He's got to be overturned and overturned and overturned again and again. And I think like fundamentally it is the path that he's on is that of like an educative path. He's trying to graduate. He's trying to get somewhere. He's going through a curriculum of all of life's experiences in 24 hours, so that he can finally get to the point where by the end he says, no, I don't care about living anymore. I've done it all. I've seen it all. Like there's nothing left for me here, and that's the moment when he's finally ready to die. You could even maybe frame this also in like an individuation lens. I don't know if you say you're fully individuated, does that mean you're ready to die? Probably not, but it probably also means that like I like the phrase, I could die today and be happy. You know what I mean? Like this idea that like maybe at the moment when you reach the highest level of enlightenment or individuation or something like that, you'd say, you know what? If today was my last day, I have lived well. I have nothing that is left undone, you know?
But that's where I don't understand this book at all, Zach. Again, I'm the kid in the field with the glove and I can't catch the ball because I was making a stupid chain of grass, which I found out I was allergic to. Idiot. But anyway, I was wondering, the end, he seems to not be like the idea of the last day. He doesn't seem like someone who's been satisfied with his life. He feels like he regrets. He feels like he's just depressed. He feels like, okay, what was it all for? And once he has that transformation, he even asks, what was the point of all that then? He doesn't seem like someone satisfied who has lived a good life. He feels like someone who has been duped and is just tired of life. Yeah. He seems like he's been on a wild goose chase, and he says, okay, what was the point of this goose chase?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I have nothing to say to that other than just, it's true. It's true. I don't know. It's true. He does seem, yeah.
It's tough being in an outfield.
Yep. Let's talk about that gang net.
Okay. Gangnet is so very suddenly, again, Sullenbow just dies. You know, he has been too distracted. Again, Maskell has been distracted by the thunder, the lightning, all of this sound, these drums that are beating, the light out there. It's all of that muspel light. And he's looking, staring at it. And then she is trying to get his attention. Sullenbow is trying to get his attention, remind him, look, we have a really wonderful relationship here. He ignores it completely. She walks away and just falls flat, dies. Then he gets on very quickly onto a raft with a couple of strange characters, but one he recognizes from before. One is Crag. So we run into Crag again, and then someone we've not met before, Gangnet, and he is a little bit taciturn, a little bit quiet, but he's there on the raft with the two other guys, almost just hanging out, waiting for something to happen.
And he has a revelation that he's nothing. It says, suddenly his chaos of passion sprang together, and a wonderful idea swept through his whole being, accompanied by the intensest joy. Why, Gangnet, I am nothing. No, you are nothing. That's a really weird response, by the way. I am nothing. No, you are nothing. Anyways, one thing I want to point out here is that Gangnet doesn't tell him that he's nothing. Rather, a wonderful idea sweeps through his whole being. So really, he intuits this. He has an intuitive grasp of this revelation. And it got me thinking about, like, all the characters that have come before. Usually they're either telling him or demonstrating things to him as kind of like a role model kind of way. He's interlocuting with them. But this one, Gangnet, seems to just kind of be like he's like a midwife to Maskell's understanding. Like, him just being there seems to help Maskell intuit these things.
He's like Socrates on the raft, the midwife of ideas. It's interesting, too, because maybe Crag seems to know all. You know, he knows everything that Maskell has been up to. And he says, you're an open book, but he doesn't explain anything. He just knows that he's been doing everything because Crag seems to be everywhere all at once. Gangnet would obviously have a clear connection with Maskell because, surprise, surprise, when Maskell keeps getting more and more frustrated with Crag and says, yes, I might murder you, Crag says, yes, I can smell murder in the air, but whose? At this point, Gangnet becomes Nightspore, kills Maskell. Maskell falls over dead. Maskell wakes up again, realizes he's dead, and then dies a second time, and then becomes Nightspore again. So it makes sense that Nightspore either can read Maskell's mind or has already been through this rigmarole, this wheel a few times because he's so bored by the journey, and we know that at the very beginning. He keeps looking out the window of the rocket ship as if he has done this so many times. He's bored out of his mind. So it makes sense that he would know everything that Maskell has experienced because maybe he's experienced it himself, or because they share like one spirit or one brain. He can intuit very clearly what Maskell needs to think.
This is a huge idea of the book, this idea that Maskell is Nightspore. And when we learn this, it really makes us have to reevaluate everything we know everything that came before in the relationship between Moskal and Nightspore. Because as I was reading this, I was like, well, wait a minute. Didn't they show up together to this seance at the very beginning? Like, aren't they buddies? Aren't they all buddies? Wouldn't they know? Well, actually, if you go back and you reread it, they don't actually seem to know each other. They seem to be two random strangers. But what's really, really interesting about them is Moskal is described as kind of like a really big kind of guy, kind of a chunky, beardy guy with a really bushy beard.
A giant.
Kind of a giant, yeah. But Nightspore is described as a man with all superfluities. Yeah, and you know the word I'm trying to say. He removed. So everything, he's a man with everything that's not man cut away. And one description I got for these two characters is Moskal is the everyman. He's you and I, he's the guy down the street, he's sitting at the pub right now. Nightspore is the indomitable human spirit. So if you read it like that, this journey, part of this journey, which does include Moskal running through this planet trying to find Nightspore, well, that's the common man on a search for, the indomitable human spirit, that human spirit which is inside of us all. It's, it's man in search of his soul, basically. Culminating in the end, I guess, with death and realizing that, that identification with that soul, with that spirit, with that force. That's a very, I guess, allegorical reading, and I'm putting a lot of things together, but I don't know. After this revelation, I kind of had to go back and think, okay, what are we doing here? What's going on?
Yeah, I think at this point we really need to, this is really key, I think. A lot of the other things have been little lessons and they've been ideas of, okay, yeah, you can have an idea system, but we really need to discard it. We have to discard these attachments if it is somehow Buddhist, I don't know. But I think here we need to bring in any toolkit to try and figure out exactly what's going on. Again, earlier we were saying maybe Moskal is masked skull, the idea of corporeality or the idea of mortality. Eventually you will die, but also very body oriented. He might also be, muscle. He's so big, or masculine. He sounds like masculine, Moskal. I wonder, maybe he is just like the very male principle, and Nightspore needs to be kind of the refined male. It could be, a very masculine book now that we look at it that way. It could be read that way. But I think now we need to think, because even Nightspore asks this question, he says, what has it all been for? Why did we have to go through this? Why did Moskal have to go through all of these things? And now what really have I learned? Except that I've been duped by you, Crag. I think here is, and is Crag even a good guy? It's hard, he doesn't seem trustworthy at all. He seems like a very bad guy. But I think a big question has to come at this point on the raft. What has been the point of this whole book?
I'd really be interested in hearing anyone who's watching this right now. Leave a comment. If you have some ideas on what to make of this identification between Moskal and Nightspore, because I think, I like what I said, but I have a feeling that, we can maybe put some puzzle pieces together and come up with something possibly a little better. I don't know. How about that tower, Bob?
Let's see, the tower. Okay, so in the tower, I know you have a theory about windows we need to get into. I'd really like to understand why the tower is shaped as it is. But I also wondering the visions that happen on the tower, coming back to the tower, and even my impression is that they are back in, oh no, what is that called?
Scotland?
What part of Scotland?
Oh, I can't remember. Wherever the observatory is, if it's even a real observatory.
If it's even a real observatory, it seems like they have used the back rays to come back to the observatory, and he is standing there at the very end. Nightspore is standing where they started at the beginning of their journey. But there are so many visions that are happening throughout this, it's hard to tell exactly where we are, and if we end up in that place, what has really gone on all this time?
Wow. It never really occurred to me. Well, okay, So you're making my mind dance, Bob. You're making my mind dance. Okay. So at one point we are told that his journey was a soul journey, not a bodily journey. Despite this whole deal with the rocket with the lights and the sprockets, whatever. They make pretty clear halfway through that his body didn't actually go there. It's his soul that went to Arcturus. So if that is the case, if we were to return back to that tower from which they left, it would be a return back to the body. I mean, I personally view this not as a physical journey through space, but as the soul's spiritual journey. Like that's how I view it. I just don't think it works as a character's movement from one physical location to another physical location. I think it only works with Arcturus as a kind of spiritual domain, which could be a journey within the self, or it could be, a journey into the ether or something, whatever. But I don't think we went to Mars. You know what I mean?
I think we went to Mars, Zach. I like the science fiction element of this. I don't want to give up on the science fiction element. I think it's cool, even though it's hard to know, because let's just go back for a minute. When they're actually going to go there, they're using three things. They're using those back rays or forward, whichever one they're using, the Arcturus rays. They're using the spaceship, and they also take a drug. So, it's hard to say what really happens, but I feel like whether or not, I think for me, they go there, it is kind of a weird soul journey, but I think there's an interesting relationship between David Lindsay now and this book and this experience for him. Again, as the, the person who runs a kind of seance, the medium, I guess. He says, I dream with eyes open, and it feels like his 15 years of collecting things, he is really doing his own kind of personal psychology. Maybe not, but he's like really trying to get at some deep truth, not just to ICP, show us shit that will shock our eyelids, but also to get to the bottom of something really essential for him. And whether that means going to another planet, whether it means going into the soul, or whether both things are happening simultaneously, I think it's important to look at the visions that is happening in the final stretch of returning back to that tower, of making that final journey home, because we see so much that is told us is the absolute truth. But even that is not super clear, because it might just be a vision. It might be a vision kind of mediated with Crag. It might be a vision manipulated by Crag/Surtur or Crystalman. I am not sure.
Yeah. So when we get to this tower, we have an ascent. Now, an ascent, that's a very that's a very loaded symbol. You know what I mean? Climb into the mountaintops. You know what I mean? Like it's a visual metaphor for gaining more and more knowledge. And as he ascends,
I was thinking you were going Freudian there.
Oh,
the tower ascends. Sorry,
you dirty dog. All right. So as he goes from floor to floor, he looks out at each level, and my brain no think good. I just copied and pasted what he saw. I figure I'll just read it, and we can talk about what it is. Okay. So okay. So he gets to the first window, and it says this. On to this he clambered and looked through. The window was a sort of glass, but he could see nothing. Coming to him, however, from the world outside, a disturbance of the atmosphere struck his senses, causing his blood to run cold. At one moment, it resembled a low, mocking, vulgar laugh, traveling from the ends of the earth. At the next, it was like a rhythmical vibration of the air, the silent, continuous throbbing of some mighty engine. The two sensations were identical, yet different. They seemed to be related in the same manner as soul and body. After feeling them for a long time, Knightsport got down from the embrasure and continued his ascent, having meanwhile grown very serious. So we look through the first window. We see nothing. We feel these kind of low frequency oscillations and something that sounds like laughter. But he says that it's two of them, and it's kind of like soul and body.
Death Cab for Cutie. So soul and body. I mean, I know he was really into Schopenhauer, and he probably read The World as Will and Representation. And I wonder if that is part of it too. The idea of will just kind of being the life force always expanding, and then representation being all of the different kind of like faciny, all of the different manifestations of that will that can then kind of look back at the will. So the will can regard itself in these different manifestations. I wonder if that is what's going on here in this kind of Gnostic, I guess, opposition between soul and body, and the idea of being stuck in this world, being stuck because of crystalmen and having to be regenerated. It feels like it's going to make a Gnostic conclusion and say anything that is body, which includes pleasure and pain, pain might help wake you up. Pleasure is going to get you stuck there, but they're both still two sides of the same bodily coin. The fleshy coin is kind of gross. But soul is going to be something else, which is going to be released and goes back to like the world of forms or wherever it belongs.
Yeah. We'll get there. I think that what we're seeing is something almost like a Genesis. You know, it's like I don't say a Genesis retelling, but I think we'll take a look at window 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6. But I think that, you know, right now we're starting with two substances that are the same but different. He says basically they're soul and body. Let's just see what happens to them.
Okay.
Window 2. The climbing became still more laborious, and he was forced to stop at every third or fourth step to rest his muscles and regain breath. When he had mounted another 20 stairs in this way, he came to a second window. Again, saw nothing. The laughing disturbance of the air, too, had ceased. But the atmospheric throb was now twice as distant as before, and its rhythm had become double. There were two separate pulses. One was in the time of a march, and the other was in the time of a waltz. The first was bitter and petrifying to feel, but the second was gay, enervating, and horrible. Nightspore spent little time at that window, for he felt that he was on the eve of a great discovery, and that something far more important awaited him higher up. He proceeded aloft. The ascent grew more and more exhausting, so much that he had frequently to sit down, utterly crushed by his own dead weight. So, before, we had two even hums. Think like a ambient music with two synthesizers playing the same note, I guess. Now, we got a low-frequency oscillator. Vum, 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 vum. But one of them is in 4/4 time, a march, and the other one is in 3/4 time, a waltz. And the 4/4 time one is bitter, petrifying to feel. But the second one is gay, enervating, and horrible. It's an interesting 3 adjectives to. So, but now, okay. So now, before, two separate tones, and we've now added rhythm, and they have two different emotional aspects to them.
Starting to remind me a lot of the tower in the Southern Reach series. It feels like the tower where we go in, we try and interpret things that are happening. When we meet the crawler, it's just completely, you can't even understand. And it seems to be full of contradictions, like the idea of the energy being enervating, gay, but also horrible. It seems to be too many things happening at once. He climbs up. He's feeling heavier and heavier, but he gets up to the third window. It says, his feelings translated themselves into vision, and he saw a sight that caused him to turn pale. A gigantic self-luminous sphere was hanging in the sky, occupying nearly the whole of it. This sphere was composed entirely of two kinds of active beings. Again, we have two. We have a pair again. There were a myriad of tiny green corpuscles, varying in size from the very small to the almost indiscernible. They were not green, but he somehow saw them so. They were all striving in one direction, toward himself, toward Muspel. It's interesting now, he is standing in for Muspel almost, but were too feeble and miniature to make any headway. Their action produced the marching rhythm he had previously felt, but this rhythm was not intrinsic in the corpuscles themselves, but was a consequence of the obstruction they met with. So all of these little green things are trying to go forward, but they're being blocked by these other things that are going to prevent them from going forward.
And another important thing, so because they're being blocked, it's creating that 4/4 rhythm. And that 4/4 rhythm, the march rhythm, how does he describe that? Bitter and petrifying. So because they're being blocked, they're creating that bitter and petrifying rhythm. So it continues on. It says, and surrounding these atoms of life and light were far larger whirls of white light, which gyrated hither and thither, carrying the green corpuscles with them wherever they desired. Their whirling motion was accompanied by the waltzing rhythm. Okay, so first saying, it's not where the green corpuscles desire, it's where the white light desires. That's where the green is carried. And that's the waltzing rhythm. So that is the gay, innervating, and horrible. So they're in this kind of like sickly dance. The white lights are in a sickly dance that is related to each other, and the green corpuscles are just kind of trapped within. They want to go out. They want to go. They want to go to Muspel, but they can't. So continuing on, it says, it seemed to Nightspore that the green atoms were not only being danced about against their will, but were suffering excruciating shame and degradation in consequence. The larger ones were steadier than the extremely small. A few were even almost stationary, and one was advancing in the direction it wished to go. So one out of all of these is happening to go towards Muspel, but the rest are not.
Again, I'm seeing that ascending tower here. As he goes, he looks through the window and he's trying to think, okay, I must know something about this. I must understand this. He's looking for a memory, but he can't get anything. Instead, it says horror and wrath began to take possession of him. And he continues up. He now goes up to another window and he sees invisible fingers squeezing his heart, not sees, but feels, and twisting it about here and there. So he's feeling worse and worse as he gets higher and higher. Finally, he gets there. It says, when at last he looked, he saw the same sphere as before, but now all was changed on it. It was a world of rocks, minerals, water, plants, animals, and men. He saw the whole world at one view, yet everything was so magnified that he could not distinguish the smallest details of life. In the interior of every individual, of every aggregate of individuals, of every chemical atom, he clearly perceived the presence of the green corpuscles. But according to the degree of dignity of life, of the life form, they were fragmentary or comparatively large. In the crystal, for example, the green imprisoned life was so minute as to be scarcely visible. In some men it was hardly bigger, but in other men and women it was 20 or 100 times greater. So it seems like people are possessed with these different things. They seem almost soul, they're animating principles almost, as he's looking and seeing people now being moved by them.
Yeah, I mean, it really reminds me of the, what's it called? Like the pan consciousness of nature. What is that theory called? This idea
Panpsychism?
Panpsychism, the idea that everything is in the world is like either ensouled or containing some sort of mental structure to it. So like even, crystals having the very least, it's describing crystals and rocks having very, very little, and some people having just as much as a crystal. I guess those are the NPCs of this world. But then, that would also seem to include like, the trees, the video camera having some, I don't know, but it seems like everything in this sphere has some quantity of the spiritual corpuscles. I'll continue. But great or small, it played an important part in every individual. It appeared as if the whirls of white light, which were the individuals and plainly showed themselves beneath the enveloping bodies, were delighted with existence and wished only to enjoy it. But the green corpuscles were in a condition of eternal discontent, yet, blind and not knowing which way to turn for liberation, kept changing form, as though breaking a new path by way of experiment. When the old grotesque became metamorphosized into the new grotesque, it was in every case the direct work of the green atoms, trying to escape toward Muspel, but encountering immediate opposition. These subdivided sparks of living fiery spirit were hopelessly imprisoned in a ghastly mush of soft pleasure. They were being effeminated and corrupted, that is to say, absorbed in the foul, sticky, enveloping forms. Okay, so what we're getting here then is almost, I think we're talking about evolution, right? Like the green corpuscles are changing from form to form, birth, death, the eternal cycle, the carbon cycle of the earth. This eats that and that eats this, and this form changes into that over long periods of time. The green corpuscles remain. The will remains, the spirit remains, but the forms are constantly changing in a cycle. All right, Bob, we got 2 more windows here. Let's take a look at what happens through window number 5.
Window number 5.
Yeah, so he says, looking through the window, he was startled by a new sight. The sphere was still there, but between it and the Muspel world in which he was standing, he perceived a dim, vast shadow without any distinguishable shape, but somehow throwing out a scent of disgusting sweetness. So that goes back to that waltz idea, right? The waltz is gay and horrible. It's a disgusting sweetness. There's something sick about the pleasure in this system. Nightspore knew that it was Crystalmen, a flood of fierce light, but it was not light, but passion was streaming all the time from Muspel to the shadow and through it. When, however, it emerged on the other side, which was the sphere, the light was altered in character. It became split as by a prism into the 2 forms of life which he had previously seen, the green corpuscles and the whorls. What had been fiery spirit but a moment ago was now a disgusting mass of crawling, wriggling individuals, each whirl of pleasure-seeking, will-having, as nucleus, a fragmentary spark of living green fire. Nightspore recollected the back rays of Starkness, and it flashed across him with the certainty of truth that the green sparks were the back rays, and the whirls were the forward rays of Muspel. The former were desperately trying to return to their place of origin, but were overpowered by the brute force of the latter, which wished only to remain where they were. The individual worlds were jostling and fighting with, and even devouring each other. This created pain, but whatever pain they felt, it was always pleasure that they sought. Sometimes the green sparks were strong enough for a moment to move a little way in the direction of Muspel. The worlds would then accept the movement, not only without demur, but with pride and pleasure, as if it were their own handiwork, but never saw beyond the shadow. They thought they were traveling towards it. The instant the direct movement wearied them, as contrary to their whirling nature, they fell again to killing, dancing, and loving. Whew. Okay, so you have you have the Muspel, where the world of that's sending out passion, fiery passion. There's the shadow, which is devouring the fiery passion and excreting these 2 different forms, the green corpuscles and the white light. So Muspel shooting out, Crystalmen / the shadow taking it and trapping things in this sphere. And yeah. What else are we doing in this one? What have we added here?
It feels almost like we're getting close to this idea of is Muspel tricking us? Like, is it luring us for no good reason? Is it the light that the moths are going to plink into? And it feels almost like going into Plato's cave, like a Platonic idea of the thing that is true and the things that are not true, that are just illusions. We have so much of a shadow here. If Crystalman is shadow, it's like the shadows that the people in the cave see. They think that's the real reality. They think it's everything going on before their eyes is what is true about their nature. When they're finally woken up, they go out into light and they're overwhelmed. But here we're adding this kind of physical idea of the very particles themselves are participating in this. The particles are either illusion, they're stuck in an illusion, or they are doing nothing, or that illusion is the truth. It's hard to say which, if the direction they're going into is a direction worth going to, but it does feel like particles now are stuck there in that cave.
Yeah, I think Plato's cave is a really good comparison to make here. Because the outside light, when you leave the cave, if you can leave the cave, that's the truth of it. That's the goodness. That's knowledge. That's uncorrupted existence. But everyone is unfortunately trapped within that cave, and they like it there. The thing about Plato's cave is the one person goes out, learns the truth, and comes back and tries to tell everyone, and they hate him for it because they like their shadow puppets. So yeah. All right, we got one more window, and I think it's going to wrap things up in a hopefully nice bow. Whew.
A wind bow.
The shadow form of Crystalman had drawn much closer to him and filled the whole sky, but it was not a shadow of darkness, but a bright shadow. It had neither shape nor color, yet in some way suggested the delicate tints of early morning. It was so nebulous that the sphere could be clearly distinguished through it. In extension, however, it was thick. The sweet smell emanating from it was strong, loathsome, and terrible. It seemed to spring from a sort of loose, mocking slime, inexpressibly vulgar and ignorant. The spirit stream from Muspel flashed with complexity and variety. It was not below individuality, but above it. It was not one, capital O, or the many, capital M, but something else far beyond either. It approached Crystalman and entered his body. If that bright mist could be called a body, it passed right through him. The passage caused him the most exquisite pleasure. The Muspel stream was Crystalman's food. The stream emerged from the other side onto the sphere in a double condition. Part of it reappeared intrinsically unaltered, but shivered into a million fragments. These were the green corpuscles. In passing through Crystalman, they had escaped absorption by the reason of their extreme minuteness. The other part of the stream had not escaped. Its fire had been abstracted. Its cement was withdrawn, and after being fouled and softened by the horrible sweetness of the host, it broke into individuals, which were the whirls of living will. Nightspore shuddered. He comprehended at last how the whole world of will was doomed to eternal anguish in order that one being might feel joy. So here it is, Bob. Here it is. We got the one and the many. We got, that thing which is the source of all, God, I guess. And then you have the parasite, Crystalman, which is feeding off of that God, and everything that it digests is matter in the world around us, and everything that it can't digest, those things that are left over, are souls and individuals with their wills and their passions, and we just want to return back to the God. But the metaphor he's giving us, even if he's not going to spell it out, even if he's not going to say it, I'm going to say it right here. I'm going to say it right now, Bob. We live in a world of shit. Everything is just shit from Crystalman, and we are the corn kernels wishing to get back to the field.
Oh, we can grow into a happy little stock.
Yeah.
The kernels of life. So it feels like, again, the sun is behind the moon or something, and the moon is this false god. We have the demiurge, who is Crystalman, turning things into crystal, the kind of ever folding out of his digestive tract. This is where it truly gets Gnostic, and it feels... this is kind of where it feels a little bit dissatisfying, I guess, in some ways, because it does feel like the question that Nightspore asks at the very end, what was it all for? Maskell has just been seeing illusions, just been seeing shit. And he's been, scraping off this shit the whole time until he scrapes himself completely away and becomes Nightspore. And the idea, again, of Nightspore potentially being that little spore that will eventually bloom, he finally gets that knowledge and he sees what's really true because he finally gets close enough to that true light and he knows what's going on. But it does feel like, Maskell has just been played.
Wow. I can't believe you felt unsatisfied at this ending. I loved it.
Okay.
But fair enough. Yeah.
As a book ending, I think it's quite good, but it does make me feel like if we're learning how to deal with the soul, I guess it just feels, I don't know, Gnosticism just feels negative.
Well, the thing is that if you told me, I mean, as many did, say that this was a Gnostic book, I kind of knew the ending from the beginning. This is textbook Gnosticism. That's true. So then it's like, why do we go through all this other stuff? And I think that's kind of what you were getting at before. Like, what? I guess I think you asked that like 3 or 4 times. Why are we doing this? Why are we walking? Why are we having all these conversations? Because the conversations leading up don't necessarily, to me, feel like they culminate in this final revelation. They feel kind of like interesting but separate. Like maybe they're on a different path of how to live. And this is, I think I might have brought this up before. It's certainly all over my notes. Like, why why all the weird names that are kind of defy, normal thought patterns? Why set it in this other place? Why have all of these conversations which adopt these philosophies wholesale and then discard them just as easy? I think the idea that he's trying to do is kind of shake you out of your reality. You know what I mean? He's trying to get you to question not just basic things about your own personal outlook, but just like basic things about how the world works, like a water spring that goes up and never comes down. Or he picks up what does he pick up? A piece of fruit, cracks it open, and there's a tree inside, and he throws it in the water and it starts swimming. Like everything about here is intended to break down the conceptual order of the universe as you kind of know it in your everyday life. So maybe all of those moving up were just thought exercises so that by the time he gives you this, you're more receptive to it. That's the only way I can chalk this up, Bob.
Well, what if we looked again at the Jungian idea, and if we decided to say, okay, Muspel might really be the energy, the libido trying to get you towards some greater light. I wonder if it is kind of an internal, if we're talking about it's not really going to a planet and it is a spiritual journey, what if it's not just proving that there is a false god, a demiurge that has made all of these things to trick us into continuing to be its food and to avoid ascending as a soul? If there is some kind of something that can be gleaned for us as people who have entered into David Lindsay's mind and into Arcturus, onto Tormance. Is there some kind of relationship between our outward emitting light and then the light that is somehow meeting that? As if we have that real light internalize into us in the first place. And so the libido will be kind of that guiding light back towards the source. So not just to say that life is totally wasted, but to say that and this is kind of almost going back to Korpang and some of his theories, but to say that our light, which is emitting forward and tracking itself to the true sun, in that journey of discovering that perfect connection of light, are we learning things that are really essential that will help us pursue that light more? So not to say that everything is shit and we're just wasted, and that all this time is wasted, but that we need to go through this in order to get on that right path anyway. So by the time that we do die, it does feel like we have lived a good life. Not the conclusion that Maskell makes, that no, this was a waste of time, but a conclusion that we can make maybe is that we have lived a good life.
Yeah. And, I'll go back to that three gods thing, just objects, as a point, or it's just width. If you have objects and relations, well, that's a flat plane, but you need that feeling. And that feeling is really that sense, the green corpuscles in you, the will in you trying to return back to the source. I think that's what he's describing with the feeling. So it's like he needed to go through all of these steps, and not just go through all these steps, but learn as he went, but also with the whole organs thing, learn to see things anew, learn to feel things, learn to take in new kinds of information about the world before he could get to that intellectual understanding. And intellectual understanding is different than, I don't know, I don't know. I could tell you that E equals MC squared, and you would say intellectually, I got you. You know what I mean? But conceptually, I don't know what that means. Does that make sense? Do you get what I mean? You can, there's knowledge that you can just say, yes, gotcha. And then there's knowledge that you in your heart of heart, know. You know what I mean? You master it. You have the full picture. I don't know.
Do you think that is why perhaps Maskell has been used as an instrument? That's introduced to us at the very beginning, the voice of Muspel, or the voice of whatever it is, it speaks to him before he even makes the journey. You're going to die, and it's going to be because of Nightspore. Not necessarily that Nightspore is going to kill you, but Nightspore will be the cause of your death. So Maskell has gone as an instrument to be mortality, or to be the mortal experience, or just to be whatever drive he is. If he's the pleasure drive or the death drive, it's hard really to say if he's a masked skull or if he's just muscle and masculine. But it feels like if he is the instrument, he has been used as a kind of substitute, almost like a avatar in a way for Nightspore to go through, to have this necessary transformation. It's like he might be the dreamer, and Nightspore has to then use those dreams. Maskell has been the experiencer, one who's actually going out into the world and making these conclusions, living, and whether or not he has that conceptual understanding, he has at least lived it firsthand. And then Nightspore takes that as conceptual understanding, maybe.
Yeah. Or Nightspore is the green corpuscle within Maskell's white light. Corpuscle. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I don't think I have enough textual evidence for that, but you know. Well, Bob, this was a hell of a book. I'm probably going to listen to it, at least the audiobook, a couple more times just to say I did, I guess. I don't know why. Actually, I think next up for me is watching that movie that you mentioned. And speaking of movies, I think we're going to do a follow-up episode in 2 days. That is going to be all of the sources that we consulted. A lot of the things we read, just talk through them, share them with people. And, if you've read this book, or maybe you haven't read this book and for some reason are still watching this video at however many hours we're in at this point, and you want to know more, even more about it, this could be a good way for you to kind of dive into that rabbit hole, you know?
And for the love of God, we would love any theories that anyone else have. Zach and I have been hitting our heads against this book for days. And if anyone else knows anything that we have not mentioned or contradict us, support anything we've said, or just come up with a totally brand new theory, that would be very much appreciated.
Yeah. Yeah. We're reading them all, you know.
We are. Yes.
Yeah. All right. Talk to you later, Bob.
See you in the window. See you in the corpuscle. See you in the light. See you in the muscle light. See you at the bottom of the lake with the lake with the sexy crab.